This guy went into a dungeon alone to fight goblins, and he even covered his eyes to prove he could win without his vision. None of the goblins understood why this lunatic was doing that, so they just attacked. To their surprise, he was completely destroying them even with his eyes closed. When Shin was done, hundreds of bodies were scattered across the floor. He slowly removed the blindfold, looked around, and said it was too easy, and his mission was almost complete. Just a few days before, when Shin showed up at the dungeon entrance carrying a longsword, the other adventurers could barely hide their disgust. The leader figured he was just another idiot who watched a few videos online and thought he was ready. One of the members flat out told him he wouldn't get any special treatment and would have to work just like everyone else. Nobody expected him to make it to the end, but what happened next was unexplainable. A few hours later, when the entire team failed against the dungeon boss and retreated in fear for their lives, Shin walked into the room alone with a smile on his face. He dodged every attack and asked if they weren't the veterans who said he would just get in the way. He wiped out the boss and every single monster in that room. When he walked out, he was carrying the rarest item in the dungeon. Now everyone who looked down on him either respects him or is flat out scared of him. But what nobody there knew was that he had a dark reason behind his strength. When Shin was a child, that was right when those cursed portals started appearing and monsters began pouring into the world. Back then, Shin watched his teacher tell him to run and save himself, while she herself met the worst possible end, right in front of his eyes. He couldn't run like she said. He stood there thinking there was no way humanity could survive something like this, so there was no point in resisting. But then a flash of light cut through every single monster at once. That guy was so incredible and so powerful that something shifted inside Shin's heart. If he could become someone like that, maybe he could make his teacher proud, but here's a hard truth to swallow. More than 30 years passed. He became a hunter, grew strong, and still the monsters never stopped coming. And that hero who once saved him died in his arms. There's something brutal about finding out your heroes aren't invincible. With a broken heart, Shin fought for another 20 years. By the time he was 55, alone on the battlefield, he was the only one left standing. But he can't help wondering why he's still grinding this hard at nearly 60 years old. 30 years ago, Shin Sang-yoon started his life as a swordsman, and his greatest achievement was breaking into the top 100 in the country. Even so, that's not saying much, since he's basically a needle in a haystack. After clearing the dungeon, he receives a skill book as a reward. He thinks about how he's consumed artifacts before, and wonders if he can do it again. Then, something appears near him. The Constellation Late Exemplary student shows up and congratulates the protagonist on his work, praising his flawless finishing strike. This is essentially the physical manifestation of Shin Sang-yoon's personal constellation. In this world, to become an adventurer, a person has to form a contract with a constellation, and he's grateful he managed to do that. Still, he figures that because of the insane conditions the constellation proposed, he hasn't actually benefited from the contract yet. The constellation then encourages Shin Sang-yoon to consume the book. The protagonist doesn't literally eat it, but absorbs the object using his powers, since that's the only special ability he ever awakened. Before that, Shin Sang-yoon couldn't make use of magical artifacts at all. Desperate, he tried consuming them to see if it would do anything, but nothing worked. He did it for nothing, because the experiment produced 0 results. 30 years passed, and he couldn't use a single thing he earned in dungeons. Then he learned to synchronize his mana with the right artifacts, and he finally managed to absorb them. He called this ability artifact Devouring. But since he figured it out too late, others had already grown far stronger than him, which put him at a serious disadvantage. When he looks at the book he received, he realizes there are no instructions on how to use it. His constellation takes the book and tries to work with it. It quickly admits that it has very limited information about Shin Sang-yoon's ability, and expresses regret over not being more helpful. It also tells him he has time and could try synchronizing his mana again. Frustrated, Shin Sang-yoon says he doesn't have much time to spare, and that he's old enough to be the father of some of these rookies. Then he tells his constellation it did nothing wrong, and apologizes for taking out his anger on it, admitting that his life is full of frustrations. Shin Sang-yoon says he never forgot the person who saved him in the past. Because of that, he always wanted to be like that guy, but it only left him exhausted with everything. He thinks that if he were just a little younger, he could try something different. But he says he's old and is going to retire, so his constellation should start looking for another adventurer to form a contract with. Right after that, though, Shin Sang-yoon is caught off guard. His constellation uses its powers on him, and that was his farewell to his 55-year-old life. In another scene, a reporter is interviewing a woman, asking whether dungeons are the places where adventurers work. The person being interviewed is the CEO of the Hyunjong Corporation. Her name is Han, and she says dungeons are the stepping stones of adventurers. But she adds that portals also exist, and they take adventurers to alternate dimensions connected to unknown regions. The protagonist watches the interview on the TV in his home. He realizes he really has gone back in time, because he watched this interview when it first aired, and now everything is repeating itself. It's been 4 days in his new life, and he's already figured out that he's been sent 30 years into the past. When it all happened, he lost consciousness, and when he woke up, he found himself in the bedroom of the apartment he lived in 30 years ago. On top of that, his body changed too, becoming 30 years younger, but all the memories from his old life remained completely intact. Shin Sang-hyun doesn't know exactly how it happened, but he knows his constellation was responsible for it. Even though he's still confused, he figures the best thing he can do right now is go out and get to work. At the moment, he only has a bronze dagger, the same weapon he started with. But now he knows something he didn't know before. That dagger has a hidden ability, and even though the weapon is low rank, that doesn't matter. Before moving forward, the protagonist knows there's a specific place he needs to go. Shin Sang-hyun heads to the space of unconsciousness, because he knows that's the only place where he can consume an artifact. He gets nervous every time he does this. Then, an artifact materialized in the form of food appears before him. The protagonist breathes a sigh of relief, because this time it showed up as normal food, and not some disgusting insect. He figures that if it were always like this, he'd level up really fast. When he eats the chicken, he absorbs the essence of the dagger and acquires the weapon's hidden ability, called Demon Strike. After devouring the artifact and returning, the dagger disappears for good, a consequence of having its essence absorbed. Either way, the protagonist gets what he wanted and is ready to go. In the middle of the city, a team is about to enter a dungeon. Yoon Dae-kyung, the team leader, is approached. The person in charge of transport says that Shin Sang-hyun, one of the team members, has left, and now they're one worker short. But Yoon Dae-kyung says Shin Sang-hyun left because he's joining his group. Confused, the transport manager asks how a newly awakened person was so quickly brought into an expedition alongside a team of adventurers. He points out that the young man didn't finish the Adventurer Academy, and that putting him in the field could be dangerous for everyone. Yoon Dae-kyung responds that he has everything under control, that he's the one responsible for the group and for contributing to the distribution system. With that, the transport manager feels intimidated and apologizes. Then, one of the team members questions his leader for the same reason. Yoon Dae-kyung says he accepted the rookie because he volunteered, and that if anyone has to die, it should be him and not someone from the team. Besides, if the kid doesn't make it, the others won't have to deal with the hassle. The protagonist then arrives at the location, saying that from now on he won't be just a transport worker, but an adventurer. His former transport co-workers aren't too happy about that. The protagonist notices the dirty looks, but wonders if they could at least try to hide their displeasure. Either way, he's greeted by the team leader, who says it's a pleasure to finally meet him. However, Yoon Dae-kyung sees the kid carrying a longsword and asks if he actually plans to use that. The protagonist says yes, claiming he watched a bunch of videos online and knows how to handle the weapon because of it. Yoon Dae-kyung says swords like that are hard to use, but he can't get the kid to change his mind. So he tells the rookie he's got great spirit and that he hopes to count on him in there. Now that the last member of the team has arrived, everyone can head in and finally start the raid. Yoon Dae-kyung tells them that once they're inside, everyone should gather at the entrance instead of going off on their own. While waiting for everyone to enter, the leader thinks to himself that the rookie is in over his head, because there's no way someone just watches a few videos and buys a sword and then agrees to walk into a dungeon. He concludes that this kid is either crazy or arrogant enough to actually think he's a real adventurer. Either way, he figures the strategy for this raid is to let the rookies go first, and then have the more experienced members take down the monsters. So a useful idiot would quickly understand the mistake he made. But it's Yoon Dae-kyung who ends up surprised. The protagonist took down several monsters on his own, without any trouble at all, and the leader is left wondering what exactly he just witnessed. Just like in video games and fantasy novels, this world has orcs too, and they don't act all that differently from the stories told about them. That said, orcs aren't the strongest monsters out there. Compared to other creatures, they're dumber but extremely aggressive. Because of that, arrogant adventurers tend to think fighting orcs is easy, since they figure they're smarter. But that's a fatal mistake. Dumb as they are, orcs are much stronger and bigger than rookie adventurers, and they have a habit of turning cocky newcomers into ground meat. Yoon Dae-kyung's group pushes deeper into the dungeon. At one point, one of the members tells the protagonist he won't get any special treatment for being a rookie, and that he'll have to pull his weight just like everyone else. Shin Sang-hyun says he's fine with that. Even so, the adventurer keeps pressing him to give it his all, or he'll get left behind. The protagonist then asks if he can fight a monster if he comes across one on the way. Confused, the adventurer asks what he's talking about. Right after that, they're caught off guard by an orc appearing out of nowhere. But the protagonist isn't startled, since he already figured something like this could happen. The adventurer uses his shield to defend himself, and tells Shin Sang-hyun to do something instead of just standing there watching. Then, in the same breath, the adventurer insists he doesn't need help and tells the protagonist to back off, because he doesn't want a rookie's death on his conscience. That distraction nearly costs him, as the adventurer barely avoids taking a hit. Yoon Dae-kyung shows up at the last second to bail him out, knocking the orc back. The leader tells everyone to stay calm and orders them to get into formation. He takes a defensive stance and tells the others to cover his back. The orc attacks, and Yoon Dae-kyung manages to block with his shield. On top of that, he finds an opening to counter. His teammates praise the leader's performance, but the orc was only faking defeat and used that opening to strike at Yoon Dae-kyung, nearly landing the hit. The protagonist watches it all and thinks that Yoon Dae-kyung has the highest level among everyone on the team. Even so, it wasn't enough to take down the monster in one shot. Yoon Dae-kyung keeps landing hits on the orc, but they don't do much, so he has to strike the enemy over and over before finally bringing it down. After that, the leader asks if anyone is hurt. Everyone says no, and they celebrate the win. But to everyone's surprise, a group of orcs closes in, and the panic among the adventurers starts to rise. Yoon Dae-kyung thinks it's better to fall back for now, since he believes taking them on is too dangerous. The protagonist, however, asks if he can give it a shot. Nobody understands why a rookie would want to take that kind of risk. Even Yoon Dae-kyung tells the kid not to get carried away, because these enemies are powerful. But the protagonist simply ignores him and jumps into action. Shin Sang-hyun charges in hard, taking out one of the enemies with a single strike. The rest of the group is stunned watching it happen. Shin Sang-hyun asks if they're surprised because he's only level 1. Not just the adventurers, but the orcs themselves are shocked too, and they're furious, hungry for revenge. For the protagonist, that's perfect, because he's exactly where he wants to be, up against powerful enemies. On top of attacking, Shin Sang-hyun also dodges with impressive speed. Watching the protagonist fight so well, the adventurers start wondering if they're really looking at a rookie. Shin Sang-hyun takes down the enemies and stands before the last one, the leader of the pack. Enraged, the orc leader attacks relentlessly, but Shin Sang-hyun slips away with ease. And not only that, he counters with precision. Yoon Dae-kyung watches in desperation, convinced the protagonist is putting himself in danger out of pure recklessness. Shin Sang-hyun, on the other hand, thinks the team leader is being dramatic. Meanwhile, the enemy activates its special ability, called Demon Bash, which boosts its strength. Instead of getting scared, the protagonist says that's exactly what he was waiting for. The orc doesn't understand and attacks in a frenzy, but Shin Sang-hyun strikes faster and takes it out. Watching such a powerful enemy get defeated right in front of him, Yoon Dae-kyung wonders just how strong Shin Sang-hyun really is. He can't believe this guy is actually a newly awakened. On top of raw strength, Shin Sang-hyun shows an extreme level of skill with the sword. And not only did he take down the orc leader, he pierced through its armor doing it. All of this leaves everyone questioning who he really is. The protagonist notices he earned some bonuses from the victory. He doesn't really care about the bonuses though, because something else is on his mind. Shin Sang-hyun wants to distribute his newly earned points, but differently from how he did it in his previous life, because this time his focus is on the luck attribute. Then Yoon Dae-kyung walks over and asks how a newly awakened can possibly be that strong. The protagonist knows he can't tell the truth, so he says he just woke up this strong. Yoon Dae-kyung gets frustrated and says that makes no sense at all. He claims Shin Sang-hyun is dodging the question and believes he's using a magic weapon but trying to hide it. Shin Sang-hyun tells the group leader he's welcome to check the sword himself. Yoon Dae-kyung takes the protagonist's sword and sees that it's completely ordinary, with nothing that explains that kind of power. He thinks that in all his years as an adventurer, he's never seen a newly awakened fight like a level 50. In the middle of all this, one of the team members points something out. They found a secret room. Yoon Dae-kyung says the rookie may have handled the minions, but now it's the boss's turn, and he wants to keep the kid out of that fight, for his own good. Shin Sang-hyun thinks they have no idea what he's really hiding, so he gets the team leader's attention and says he wants to be the one to kill the boss ahead, and asks if he can keep the boss drop for himself. In this world, there's a highly sought-after artifact called the Scarlet Stone. This item can drop when you defeat a demon orc, but even after fighting several of them, the drop rate is extremely low, which makes the Scarlet Stone one of the hardest items to get your hands on. In the protagonist's past life, his team failed to defeat a demon orc, and another team ended up walking away with the item instead. They bragged about it, since the item was valuable and could be sold for a good amount. Beyond the money, the artifact also had the delay skill, something the protagonist absolutely needed. That's why he wanted that stone so badly. Back in the present, after defeating the monsters, Shin Sang-hyun pointed out that the team used a contribution-based loot system. So, since he had taken down all the monsters on his own, he should also keep all the rewards. Hearing that, Yoon Dae-kyung figures the delay skill is the real goal here. But a rookie adventurer talking that boldly wasn't going to be accepted so easily by the rest of the group. Some team members say Shin Sang-hyun is getting way too full of himself, and that just because he took out a few orcs doesn't mean he should be jumping to conclusions. Even so, to everyone's surprise, the team leader agrees with the protagonist's request. He does say though that if the group can't defeat the dungeon boss, Shin Sang-hyun will have to take it down on his own. Only then can he keep all the drops. For the protagonist, that's not a bad deal at all, since since he was planning to do that anyway. The leader tells Shin Sang-yun to do as he sees fit. Deep down, Yoon Dae-kyung thinks this kid is going to get himself killed sooner or later because he's nothing but an arrogant brat. He figures it's better to let him act on his own and learn that out in the field. What matters is a fighter's combat experience, not overconfidence. After that, the leader opens the boss room and they find the enemy. The monster is chained inside the dungeon's final chamber, and the Scarlet Stone is right there with it. Yoon Dae-kyung tells everyone to get ready for the fight. He figures the monster looks intimidating, but according to the guild guides, this isn't a difficult boss for a full team to handle. Still, he thinks that fighting it alone, no one would stand a chance. So Yoon Dae-kyung and his team move in to attack, but not long after, they're defeated. The leader can't understand why he had so much trouble against the boss. The protagonist thinks Yoon Dae-kyung charged in with so much confidence that he almost believed the team would pull it off. But he reflects that, in the same way, he also acted recklessly in his past life, and he has no intention of making that same mistake this time. One of the team members tries to convince the leader to fall back, saying they don't have a chance anymore. With that, Yoon Dae-kyung accepts that these guides aren't 100% reliable and orders his team to retreat immediately. Hearing that, the protagonist knows it's his turn to act. Yoon Dae-kyung realizes the kid is actually going through with it. Either way, he and his allies decide to pull back. The leader asks if Shin Sang-yun really plans to fight alone after what he just saw, and says he won't take any responsibility if the enemy takes him out. Shin Sang-yun simply tells the leader not to worry about him, because he's sure he'll win. After that, the monster takes the initiative and attacks. The protagonist thinks that if he fights this enemy head-on as an equal, his chances of winning would be slim, but he has a card up his sleeve. Shin Sang-yun has all the combat experience against these monsters. After his attack is blocked, the enemy is surprised. Not just the monster, but the other adventurers are shocked too. The protagonist thinks that for now he can only dodge, and he wants to stick to his strategy until the end. His goal is the Scarlet Stone, because he believes the delay skill pairs perfectly with the abilities he already has. His artifact devouring skill lets him combine different abilities, and by using that to his advantage, the results can be incredibly powerful. He then taunts the enemy. Irritated, the orc decides to attack. Since the monster is blind, it relies on sound to navigate. Knowing that, the protagonist tries to use the situation to his advantage. He manages to move faster than the enemy, and lands a hit with ease. When struck, the orc drops its axe, leaving it unarmed. The protagonist used his skills to stun the boss for a few seconds. Watching it up close makes Yoon Dae-kyung wonder if a skill like that can really be used against such a powerful boss. Shin Sang-yun says that despite being strong, orcs in general are pretty predictable. However, the protagonist ends up getting distracted, and because of that, the monster lands a hit on him. He barely avoided taking it full on. Shin Sang-hyun had momentarily forgotten a crucial detail. Orcs have a special self-regeneration ability. Stunning it again won't be so easy, and for that same reason, he thinks the delay skill would really come in handy. Either way, his only option is to attack the enemy head-on. Shin Sang-hyun starts fighting for real and holds nothing back. Meanwhile, one of the team members tries to convince Yoon Dae-kyung to leave the dungeon and let Shin Sang-hyun keep the monster busy. He believes the monster will win sooner or later and wants to get out before that happens. Yoon Dae-kyung, on the other hand, notices that no matter how superior the enemy might be, Shin Sang-hyun is fighting it with a smile on his face. The leader wonders if this guy is really a rookie. The protagonist is the only one who knows the truth. He thinks that when you don't have enough raw stats, the right move is to focus all your strength into a single point. In this case, he'll even need to use the enemy's own force against it. Shin Sang-hyun moves in and lands his strike. With that, he manages to pierce the enemy at a vital point. By doing so, not only does he defeat the orc, but Shin Sang-hyun also gets all the victory bonuses. He notices he's already earned 2 reward titles, and concludes that fighting alone is paying off. Then the group's leader walks over. Yoon Dae-kyung's face says everything about how surprised he is. Seeing that, the protagonist thinks there's only one way out of this. So he starts pretending the battle was much harder than it actually was, and says that if the team hadn't weakened the monster first, he wouldn't have won. While one of the allies buys into the story, Yoon Dae-kyung thinks it doesn't add up and starts to suspect the kid is hiding something. The protagonist, for his part, thinks it would be better if everyone just believed his version of events. Either way, shortly after, the Scarlet Stone drops from the monster. The leader thinks that as promised, he can't keep the item, since it wasn't his team that defeated the monster. So he says the mid-boss has been taken down, but now it's time to get ready for the final boss. With that, he and his team move on with the expedition. Shin Sang-hyun is left alone with the drop and thinks he's finally going to get what he wanted. Sometime later, the protagonist heads back to the unconscious farm. The artifact he collected has transformed into a pork stew. Looking at such an appetizing meal, he thinks there's no way it could taste bad. So he eats it and assimilates the artifact, unlocking a skill called Delay. Shin Sang-hyun is a little nervous, since this is something he'd been looking forward to. On top of that, he realizes his new skill can be combined with Demon Bash, which amplifies the effect of both. The protagonist hadn't noticed this before, and now sees that he's sitting on a major advantage. He'd heard theories about it before, but since he'd never seen anyone actually pull off that combo, he didn't think it would really work. Right in the middle of that discovery, Yoon Dae-kyung interrupts the moment and asks to have a word with the protagonist. He says the next challenge is the final boss room, the Orc Berserker. But to Shin Sang-hyun's surprise, the team leader doesn't ask him to sit this one out like last time. Yoon Dae-kyung says that if he can't make use of a teammate like Shin Sang-hyun, he doesn't deserve to call himself a leader. He says he'll be counting on the protagonist from here on out, and promises the terms stay the same. Shortly after, one of the team members announces they're ready to move on. That same member, though, isn't happy at all about the spotlight the protagonist has been getting, and Shin Sang-hyun has already picked up on that. Either way, the leader says that after the mission, they're all going out for drinks, trying to keep things smooth between the team members. After that, they reach the final boss room. The Orc Berserker radiates a powerful aura, and the team is visibly shaken. But as the leader, Yoon Dae-kyung says he'll go first. The protagonist, however, steps to the front and tells the others to follow him. Shin Sang-hyun figures this boss has weaker skill resistance than the orc he took down before, so he believes stunning it won't be hard as long as he stays calm. Still, the protagonist is surprised by his own confidence, realizing he never acted like this in his past life. When he was young, he was always afraid, and as he got older, his only goal was to survive at any cost. So he concludes that this time things have to be different, because he needs to change if he doesn't want to end up the same way as before. He knows it won't be easy, but to prove his worth, he has to pull off great things because that's the only way others will witness what he's capable of. And the protagonist isn't wrong about that, since the team leader himself witnesses his incredible strength. Shin Sang-hyun then uses his skill combo to stun the enemy. With that, the team leader orders the others to attack. Stunned, the enemy can't react in time and becomes the target of the entire adventurer team. It doesn't take long for the boss to go down, to the point where some of them start thinking it was almost too easy. Some of them realize Shin Sang-hyun was a huge help and start considering inviting him to join the group as an official member. The protagonist, for his part, notices just how much these guys' attitudes have shifted, given how poorly they were treating him at the start. Either way, he turns down the offer because his goal is to keep getting stronger, and he wants to do that on his own. He realizes he's now collecting titles he never earned in his past life. Even so, Shin Sang-hyun thinks that compared to the phantom swordsman Kyung-soo, he's nothing. After all, Kyung-soo is known as the greatest title collector, bearing the name of Perfect Swordsman, the strongest adventurer in Korea, and holding countless other titles. In just 2 years, he had already surpassed level 500, something the protagonist never even considered in his past life. But now that he has a new life, his goal is to reach that same level, and he believes that if he keeps going the way he is, it's possible he'll get there. Shortly after, Yoon Dae-kyung walks over and hands the protagonist an item. He says the guy carried the whole team on his back, and because of that, he believes he deserves to keep the item. He also mentions it's not that valuable, but he's giving it as a gesture of gratitude. Deep down, Shin Sang-hyun thinks the team leader is only doing this because he knows they won't be seeing each other again. Even though he's not thrilled about it, the protagonist knows this is the world he lives in, and he can't get attached to anyone. Watching this up close, one of the team members grows jealous seeing Shin Sang-hyun walk away with so many items. He thinks this isn't over and makes a phone call. Sometime later, back home, the protagonist celebrates, having just received his reward. He earned 6 million won from the last mission and thinks that's far more than a simple carrier ever makes. On top of that, he also got a bonus, the Berserker's Ring, an item dropped by the dungeon boss that increases the wearer's stamina. Even though it's low level, the artifact came for free, and Shin Sang-hyun believes he'll put it to good use. He thinks that normally, regular players run out of mana before they can even use their sword, and this ring helps with that.
He's not a regular player, though. Even though he awakened his abilities after the age of 50, the Shin Sang-hyun of the past studied hard, and in his previous life used many artifacts just like this one. He found out that the special effect of mana-dependent artifacts comes with a penalty, but eventually becomes cost-free.
He doesn't worry much about the penalties now, because what matters to him is acquiring more skills. Far from there, at a private club in Gangnam, the blonde from the earlier team is demanding help for his revenge. His friend, though, tells him he's way too worked up and tells him to calm down. The friend also asks why he should get involved in a grudge that isn't even his. The blonde, for his part, says Shin Sang-hyun must be rich, because that's the only way he could get that strong in such a short time. He can't convince anyone to help him, though. Irritated, one of the gang members cuts the blonde's ear, making it clear they're not slaves or personal assistants who take orders. The enforcer says the blonde got hurt because he thought he had some kind of power over them, and he paid for that mistake. Either way, he asks where exactly this Shin Sang-hyun is. Meanwhile, Shin Sang-hyun is at a training ground. After a session, he decides to stop and rest for a bit. During that break, he remembers that the berserker ring, when it transformed into food, ended up tasting like cucumber soup, which he absolutely hates. Even so, he figures the sacrifice was worth it, because now he can reduce the weight of his sword, which makes it easier to handle and boosts his attacks. For now, he thinks it's better to carry the longsword for a while to get used to it. Then he starts thinking about what his next move will be. After checking his stats, he concludes that he needs to start drawing the attention of constellations, but carefully. Ideally, it would be a constellation that matches his main attribute, luck. His attributes still aren't strong enough to catch any constellation's eye, though, so the only path forward is insane training. After training for a while, Shin Sang-hyun heads to a portal. He thinks that spending 3 days training without sleep and then driving for hours was a little over the top, but at least the effort paid off because he managed to master the skill of using a longsword with both hands, and he's about to put that into practice. He figures that if he went to the capital, it would take forever to get into a solo dungeon, so he traveled far until he found an empty one. He realizes he's not alone, though. Shin Sang-hyun noticed that a car followed him all the way to this mountain. He just doesn't know why. Whatever the reason, he thinks everything can be settled inside the dungeon. Once Shin Sang-hyun enters the dungeon, the gang members follow him in. He then points out that this is a dungeon exclusively for solo adventurers, so there's no way they ended up in the wrong place by accident. He states that he got there first and isn't giving up his priority. The gang leader responds that Shin Sang-hyun is no ordinary fool, unlike what they were told. Shin Sang-hyun realizes this isn't a regular group and understands they're there because of him. He also notices there are no healers or mages in the group. It's made up entirely of swordsmen and archers, which means they're hunters, and Shin Sang-hyun is the target. On the other side, the gang members say he'll be taken out right there and no one will ever know. Shin Sang-hyun thinks that in his past life, this kind of group was practically wiped out by the Adventurers Association. Groups like this usually have archers as their biggest threat. With that in mind, he says he wasn't just standing around waiting for nothing. He states that in a short while there will be 4 corpses on the ground and asks how they plan to deal with that once they're back outside. One of the enemies gets furious, but the leader says they can handle this the easy way. The big guy, however, isn't interested in talking. Shin Sang-hyun provokes him, telling the enemy to listen to his boss. That makes the big guy even angrier, and he charges in. Shin Sang-hyun thinks there's no expression more fitting for a dungeon than the law of the strongest. He knows that monsters have always threatened his life, just like humans who try to steal artifacts. And people are usually more dangerous than dungeon monsters, because dungeons are lawless lands, and the rule for surviving them is kill or be killed. That was the most valuable lesson he learned in his past life, and it's what kept him alive for so long. So he believes that everything that happens from this point on is self-defense. The big guy is the first to go down, and Shin Sang-hyun asks if the others aren't going to attack. Irritated, the rest of them charge in. The leader says he'll try to create some distance and tells the archer to provide cover. The archer is still in shock from watching his companion fall because he knew the big guy was strong, no matter how much of an idiot he was. He wonders how someone who awakened so recently managed to take out his friend. He concludes that they're truly up against a monster and fires his arrows. It doesn't help though, because Shin Sang-hyun deflects them with ease. The archer can't believe his attack didn't work, and in that moment of distraction, he takes a direct hit. The group's leader realizes that Shin Sang-hyun threw the longsword like a spear, with almost no effort, but that also means he's now unarmed. The leader thinks he can take advantage of the opening and attack before Shin Sang-hyun gets his sword back. Believing Shin Sang-hyun is vulnerable, he charges in alongside his remaining ally. Shin Sang-hyun runs toward his sword while the enemies try to reach him before he gets there. They don't manage it though, because he dodges at the last second, and now, Shin Sang-hyun has his sword back, with the enemies right up close. After a while, Shin Sang-hyun wraps everything up. He would have preferred to avoid that situation, but at least it helped boost his attributes. Checking his status, he notices he's at level 50. On top of that, he also kept the recovery ring, which he took from the guy who charged in without thinking. Thinking it over, Shin Sang-hyun concludes that if he had blindly relied on the rigidity effect, things could have gone badly for him. He needs to be more careful going forward. Deeper inside the same dungeon, goblins are busy mining. Then, to their surprise, Shin Sang-hyun shows up. With his eyes blindfolded, he thinks about the condition for earning the Lucky Day title, which is to defeat 500 monsters while blindfolded. The goblins don't understand what's going on, because they can see that some blindfolded guy is staring them down. Shin Sang-hyun, for his part, wonders when they're going to attack. He can sense the enemies around him, but he can't see them, so he figures he has to rely on sound and be extremely careful. To do that, he sharpens his focus and tunes in to every sound in the area, and just like a superhero, he gets the hang of it. The moment the first goblin attacks, Shin Sang-yun hits it with precision. Not only that, but he takes out all the nearby goblins and thinks the feeling is incredible. Then he picks up on an attack coming from a distance, but that's not a problem, because he catches the arrow mid-air before it can reach him, which leaves the enemy completely stunned. Shin Sang-yun says it's been a pretty dangerous day, but that it reminded him of something from his past, and somehow his perception awakened. So he doesn't fear the enemies, and tells them they can all come at him at once. Without hesitation, the goblins attack, but they're taken out one by one. Shin Sang-hyun doesn't spare a single one, which only deepens the despair of some of them. In the end, he manages to eliminate them all. Once he receives the title he was after, he finally removes the blindfold. But that doesn't mean all the enemies are gone. A few more approach the area and realize that many of their own have been wiped out. At that point, Shin Sang-hyun notices there are still a few goblins left, and farming a little more experience can't hurt. After clearing the area, he celebrates having boosted his luck so much. And as he heads out, he thinks about how much he's going to profit from taking down so many goblins. But then the atmosphere around him suddenly starts to grow darker out of nowhere. With that, Shin Sang-yun thinks he's finally about to get what he's wanted most. 3 constellations have come after him, and now he has to decide what he's going to do about it. Seeing 3 constellations standing before him, Shin Sang-yun thinks this happened faster than he expected. But when the goddess approaches, he starts to wonder if he's been a little too confident, and he doesn't know what to say since he's never been through anything like this in his past life. To his surprise, the goddess of luck tells him she's interested in him because she's never come across such an intriguing swordsman before. Shin Sang-yun simply replies that he's lucky for that and thinks with relief that all 3 constellations are interested in making a contract. He knows the janitor of the fallen dimension is a constellation drawn to killers and figures that taking down so many goblins must have caught its attention. The pilgrim of the great expanse, on the other hand, only appears to players with the potential to become saints, and Shin Sang-yun has no idea what he did to attract it. So he assumes the pilgrim only showed up because of the goddess, since she's popular even among other constellations. Either way, the goddess says she has no specific demands, and even if Shin Sang-yun chooses a different constellation, she'll still be available for a contract. He thinks he really is incredibly lucky because this is an extraordinary advantage. In the past, there was only one person he knew who had ever pulled something like this off, someone known as the Miracle Archer. Hashimoto Yuki was the most celebrated archer of his time, always hitting his targets and never running out of arrows. All of that was thanks to his 2 constellations, which made the impossible possible. Shin Sang-yun says he wasn't prepared to face 3 constellations at once and needs some time to think, but the constellations push him to decide right now because they don't want to wait. He thinks the goddess of luck is incredible, but if he chooses her, he has to accept that no other constellation will want a contract with him. Shin Sang-yun remembers that after his first 10 years as an adventurer, only one constellation ever reached out to him. It was the late exemplary student who, for the record, had a stunning appearance. Even though the journey had been miserable, Shin Sang-yun believed he had a bright future ahead alongside his constellation. But nothing happened until he turned 55, and he never managed to tap into the true power of a constellation. In the end, he only witnessed that kind of power after he reincarnated into his new life, and in a way, he feels grateful for that. Still, he needs to be careful now, because there's no guarantee he'll get another chance if he messes things up in this life. He's looking at options like holy powers, massive destruction and power amplification, or a boost to his luck factor. After thinking it over, Shin Sang-hyun accepts a contract with the goddess of luck. The goddess says the contract is valid for 30 years, even if Shin Sang-hyun is eliminated before then. She congratulates him on the contract and tells him that 15 other friendly constellations are rooting for his success. But she also warns him that 3 hostile constellations have declared they'll do everything in their power to hold him back. Shin Sang-hyun wishes both himself and the goddess good luck from here on out, and she praises him for making a wise choice. With that, she hands Shin Sang-hyun a few benefits, and he's stunned because he thinks these new abilities are seriously overpowered. The goddess says it's a perk of the contract, and it's all thanks to his own effort, but she asks what he plans to do about the other constellations. Shin Sang-hyun turns the other 2 down. The pilgrim of the great expanse says it'll wait until their next meeting. The janitor of the fallen dimension, however, warns that it will do everything it can to eliminate him for being rejected. Shin Sang-hyun thinks that with the goddess of luck by his side, he doesn't need to worry about that, and figures another constellation will come along for him later. After sealing the contract, he heads to the dungeon boss chamber and faces it head-on. The goddess watches everything up close and witnesses Shin Sang-hyun fighting with his new abilities. The dungeon boss tries to defend itself as best it can. It's a goblin lord consumed by greed speed, and being a boss, its stats are incredibly strong. The Lord is furious that its servants were wiped out and wants revenge against Shin Sang-hyun, but in doing so, it triggers the overload condition, which is exactly what he was waiting for. Shin Sang-hyun thinks the condition isn't quite as lethal as his stun ability, but it can forcibly drain the target's motivation. Confident, the enemy attacks with full force only to realize it didn't land a hit. Shin Sang-hyun dodged the attack, and now all he can think about is what he'll do once he takes the boss's ability for himself. He says it's time to put his new luck to the test in a real fight, because he has the perfect target right in front of him. With that, he lands a clean hit on the boss. The Lord can't react, and even if it wanted to, Shin Sang-hyun has complete control of the situation. With his abilities combined, he has the enemy right where he wants it. He strikes the boss several times in a matter of seconds and says that no matter how strong it is, there's no escaping elimination. After so many hits, the enemy is finally defeated. Shin Sang-hyun lets out a relieved sigh, glad for the victory and for the attribute boost that came with it. It took longer than expected, but he's happy it's over. After all, following 3 days of training without sleep, he had to deal with a gang, over 500 goblins, and now this boss. The goddess remarks that Shin Sang-hyun's luck is remarkably good, to the point where he managed to pull all of that off and still be standing. She says good luck is a skill in itself, and that she's grateful to be helping such a fortunate adventurer. Either way, Shin Sang-hyun decides to check his luck attribute and notices it's above 100 points, which means he's also hit the bonus threshold for that category. In other words, all of his other abilities have been affected by luck, and he now has a higher chance of success across the board. On top of that, luck also affects monster drops. Because of this, the dungeon boss dropped its shield, which happens to be a silver rank piece of equipment. Shin Sang-hyun says that thanks to the goddess, he's got a guaranteed artifact and he thinks it'll come in very handy going forward. He takes the opportunity to sync his mana with the shield, which gets the goddess incredibly excited. Sometime later, near Jamsil Station, the protagonist has just had a proposal turned down. He tries to convince the attendant to reconsider, but she's not willing to change her mind. Even so, Shin Sang-hyun feels like he can't give up. 2 hours earlier, while he was on the road, he thought the boss's shield had transformed into a solid meal and figured it had something to do with his luck increase. But along the way, his car started throwing out a bunch of warning signals. That's when he realized he needed a new car, which was a problem because he was already preparing to move and now had another expense to deal with. Thinking about the recent attack he'd gone through, Shin Sang-hyun concluded that the safest move would be to live in the player's city, where there's constant surveillance. However, that would mean giving up better equipment in order to invest in the new place, and now a new car on top of that. Either way, to make any of that happen, he'd need money. And at that moment, there was only one place where he could get what he needed: the Adventurers Association. By joining, he could take on missions and earn more money. Back in the present, the attendant in charge of helping him refused to let Shin Sang-hyun enter a level 100 dungeon and asked him to accept something more appropriate for his level. But the protagonist insists he won't cause any trouble and is confident he'll do just fine, even at level 17. The attendant claims she once spoke with an adventurer who said the exact same thing, and that it didn't end well for him, so she wasn't about to make the same mistake. The protagonist knows plenty of people overestimate their abilities, but unlike them, he's been through a regression and knows exactly what he's doing. In the middle of the argument, someone walks over and asks what's going on. This is Kim Miso, an adventurer from the Eden Guild. Shin Sang-hyun knows her, and he knows she's the Devastation Shooter, the first to reach level 100 and earn the title of Shooter. But what stands out most is that she's the daughter of Kim Yoon-cheol, president of Shinsung Biotech. She also teams up with Shin Tairi, the Shadow Assassin, the greatest assassin adventurer in Korea. And then there's Cho Jinho, one of the top swordsmen in the country. They're all part of the Eden Guild, where Kim Yoon-cheol is the largest shareholder. In other words, Kim Miso was born with the biggest silver spoon in the history of adventurers. For her part, Kim Miso says she's never seen the protagonist before and asks why he's pushing so hard to get into a level 100 dungeon. Seeing the two of them talking, some adventurers figure Kim Miso is just being nice to a newcomer, since only someone inexperienced would make a request like that. Answering her question, the protagonist says he needs money and is fully aware of the challenge ahead. He remembers that in the past, he asked to join Kim Miso's guild, but even though he was rejected, he holds no grudge against her. Either way, Kim Miso asks if the protagonist is aware that he won't be able to proceed with the mission since single-player parties aren't allowed. Hearing that, the protagonist remembers that solo adventurer missions won't be available for another 4 years. He had forgotten about that, so he apologizes for the trouble and says he's on his way out. But Kim Miso makes a proposal and invites the protagonist to join her in the dungeon. The other players are stunned when they hear that, practically dying of envy. The protagonist, for his part, wonders what Kim Miso is planning with this invitation. She explains herself, saying she's simply trying to help a new adventurer. But Shin Sang-hyun says it's nothing personal. He just doesn't make a habit of trusting other people. Kim Miso says she has no specific conditions for accepting him, but that if the protagonist lets her down, he'll have to pay for it. With that, Shin Sang-hyun realizes she wants to put him to the test. He knows Kim Miso's influence goes beyond being a player, since she's also a model, and the clothes she wears tend to sell extremely well. However, the moment she spots a player with too much confidence, she practically declares the end of their career. Before entering the building, Kim Miso had figured that most of her guild members were busy, and that she needed to find someone to join her on a mission. When she walked in and saw someone begging for a chance, she didn't think twice. Because of the minimum party size rule, the protagonist had run out of options. But to Kim Miso, what stood in front of her was a player full of confidence, and since she didn't know him, she was curious about him. Back in the present, she asks which mission Shin Sang-hyun had requested. The receptionist reveals it was a defense mission, which involves eliminating all monsters on the way to the Guardian Tower. Kim Miso is surprised to learn that the protagonist didn't choose a collection or attack mission, but a defense one. According to the requirements, this mission is only completed after defeating every single monster, which is why a party of 4 players is recommended. But he wanted to do it alone, which Kim Miso considers a serious mistake. The protagonist then asks if she got nervous when she heard the details. He says he's fine working with Kim Miso, but that if she prefers, she can bring more people into the party. Kim Miso says that won't be necessary, concluding that just the 2 of them, her and Shin Sang-hyun, are enough to handle this mission. The moment they accept the mission, both of them are teleported into the dungeon. The receptionist hopes nothing bad happens to them, while the other players watch in disbelief. Even knowing Kim Miso's abilities, they can't see how she and a newcomer could handle something this difficult on their own. One of them disagrees, though, and points out that the association created a new rank system specifically to measure adventurers' strength and scale the dungeons accordingly. In this system, there are 2 criteria for earning a rank. The first is the number of completed dungeons, and the second is a player's overall battle sense. Kim Miso received A+ purely based on her battle sense. That means there are no known monsters stronger than her, so that newcomer who went with her is pretty lucky to have someone that powerful by his side. After a while, already inside the mission, Kim Miso stays in the rear, since she's an archer. She thinks she needs to hold up her end of the deal, so she'll do her best to protect the protagonist if things get out of hand. Still, she thinks Shin Sang-hyun is way too confident, and that it's going to cost him, so she figures this mission will teach him a lesson. 30 minutes earlier, the protagonist had asked her to step in only if necessary, and said that if she held to that, he'd give her 5% of the profits. Kim Miso said 5% to just stay in the back was something she'd accept, but she argued it was impossible for anyone to complete this mission alone, since there would be at least 300 enemies nearby. She believed this mission would be tough even for high-level players. Even so, the protagonist insisted he could do it, so Kim Miso said she'd take 1% for every monster the protagonist failed to kill, and that if he let 95 of them through, she'd get nothing. Back in the present, the protagonist faces the wolves, convinced he won't leave a single one for Kim Miso, since he plans to take them all out before she ever needs to act. With that, he charges at the enemies. From above, Kim Miso has a clear view and can watch the protagonist in action. That's when she realizes he's not just some arrogant player, but a genuinely skilled adventurer. His stance emphasizes a superior reach, something Kim Miso has only seen in her own teammate. On top of that, she notices the protagonist avoids unnecessary movements and takes out multiple enemies with each attack. Still, she thinks it might not be enough, since there are a lot of enemies surrounding Shin Sang-hyun, and these aren't monsters a level 17 player can handle easily. But then Kim Miso notices something. All the monsters suddenly stop attacking. She quickly understands that the protagonist stunned the enemies. She's so caught off guard that she loses her balance and nearly falls from a considerable height. Either way, she now understands why Shin Sang-hyun was so confident from the start, but she can't help wondering where this guy came from. The protagonist keeps attacking the monsters. He takes down the smaller wolves and finally comes face to face with the strongest of them, the Black Wolf, leader of the pack. Shin Sang-hyun thinks he's never faced this enemy before, but feels a strange familiarity with it. He also notices the enemy has the same ability as him, stun. Even from a distance, Kim Miso gets hit, but thanks to an artifact, she isn't stunned. She realizes she barely got away with it. Even so, she figures the protagonist wasn't as lucky and that she needs to help him if he's in danger. Kim Miso believes that even if Shin Sang-hyun can stun enemies, someone at a low level won't be able to escape an enemy with the same ability. But she quickly realizes she was wrong when she sees the protagonist move, and wonders how Shin Sang-hyun is pulling that off. Beyond seeing the protagonist's combat skills, she witnesses how easily he uses his powers, even as a level 17 player. Even the wolf is caught off guard watching its prey move, since it didn't believe he could break free from the trap. Thanks to that brief moment of panic, the protagonist finds the perfect opening to strike, and with a single critical hit, takes the wolf down. After that, the protagonist says his clothes are completely dirty, but that since it's come to this, he's up for a little more fun. From a distance, Kim Miso is even more impressed by what he's done, wondering how she's never heard of Shin Sang-hyun before. After his consecutive victories, the protagonist notices he's leveling up fast. He then realizes he's been under constant observation and concludes that Kim Miso now has more than enough to believe in his abilities. Still, he knows the mission isn't over yet because the final boss is still waiting. The Full Moon Wolf Lord attacks, but can't land a hit on the protagonist. Shin Sang-hyun knows this enemy specializes in irregular attack patterns. He says that 30 years from now, every pattern this monster has will be fully analyzed. But since he's from the future, he already knows all of them. The protagonist strikes back, though he can't deal much damage because of the enemy's resistance. Even so, he manages to impress Kim Miso even further, because on top of everything she's already seen, the fact that Shin Sang-hyun handles a heavy sword like it weighs nothing catches her attention. Shin Sang-hyun keeps fighting, dodging the enemy's blows as the wolf attacks with full force. He uses his sword as a shield, and that's when Kim Miso realizes he already knows the enemy's attack patterns. But what bothers her most is that Shin Sang-hyun seems to want to prove his strength at every single moment, and that only makes her more and more curious about him. For the protagonist, the battle is dragging on longer than expected. He's already burned through every trick he had and has nothing left to show. Still, he wonders how the enemy still has so much energy. At this rate, Shin Sang-hyun thinks he's going to end up passing out from all the running around. Then he notices the monster is going for a charge. Not only that, but the wolf is using a powerful attack as bait to follow up with a piercing strike. That move is well known for taking the lives of countless adventurers. It makes the protagonist think that desperate times call for desperate measures. He attacks and manages to wound the monster, but the wolf keeps pushing forward anyway. Kim Miso is shocked by what she sees because Shin Sang-hyun, who had seemed untouchable until now, just took a direct hit. Even though she hasn't known him long, she's shaken seeing it happen. She believes that watching Shin Sang-hyun use such incredible skills made her let her guard down, and that's why she couldn't help him in time. Convinced the worst has happened, Kim Miso starts to apologize, but then she's caught off guard by a burst of bright light right in front of her. Before that moment, the protagonist had been talking with his constellation about a healing ability he'd recently obtained. The catch was that it could only be used on one specific part of his body, which he found strange. Either way, he chose to protect the spot most likely to take a hit, the front of his abdomen. Shin Sang-hyun had sacrificed the orc's shield to create that ability, but now he sees it worked exactly as planned. He figures he would have died if the hit had landed anywhere else, but luckily, the enemy attacked right where he wanted. As a result, the damage that would have hit him ended up turning against the wolf itself. By cutting off the enemy's right arm, he broke through the resistance covering the rest of its body. All that was left now was to land the finishing blow. After taking down the boss, Kim Miso approaches. The protagonist says his stun worked 3 times during the mission and thinks he's getting pretty good at it. Then he tells Kim Miso she finally came out of hiding. She fires back that he could have told her his plan because she was genuinely worried when she thought he had died. She says she'd love to know how he already knew every one of the enemy's attack patterns and asks if this is Shin Sang-hyun's second life or something like that. Kim Miso says she's met plenty of adventurers, but this is the first time someone has ever left her speechless because she never knows when he's going to surprise her next. Either way, the protagonist asks if she liked what she saw. Shin Sang-hyun starts to feel some tension in the air, noticing that Kim Miso looks a little confused. She says that watching him in action is almost like watching a very experienced player, not a rookie. He gets worried right away because he almost gave himself away. Either way, Kim Miso notices the enemy is still breathing and asks if Shin Sang-hyun isn't going to finish the job. He realizes the monster is indeed still alive and decides to put the creature out of its misery for good. When he does, he earns his first rank C title and also a specialty in solo combat. Kim Miso mentions that she's already earned that title too, since she cleared this stage on her own before, but she admits that, unlike the protagonist, she only managed it thanks to her artifact. Shin Sang-hyun replies that it still takes skill to obtain artifacts, and she thanks him for the compliment. What she doesn't mention, though, is that the artifact cost around 200 million won, and that comparing that to a guy using nothing but a plain longsword is hardly fair. Changing the subject, Kim Miso tells Shin Sang-hyun he could take this chance to test out the effects of his new title. But the protagonist realizes there's no one else around besides the two of them. He doesn't want to fight such a strong opponent in his current state, so he turns it down. With that, Kim Miso says she'll head out first and use the opportunity to call in a team to carry the mission drops. The protagonist thinks he would have done that himself, but he's exhausted. He's glad he made a good impression. Then, to his surprise, right before leaving, Kim Miso says she's going to give up her 5% of the reward. Shin Sang-yun says that isn't fair and wants to make it up to her somehow. She replies that there will be plenty of chances for them to work together again and tells him to think of it as an investment. With that, Shin Sang-yun realizes he really can't let his guard down around this girl. Now that everything's clear, he wants to get his hands on the reward he's been after, the Blue Moonstone. The protagonist is beyond excited because he finally got his hands on a platinum rank artifact. He figures an artifact at that level is easily worth 1,000,000,001, and that selling it could cover an apartment in Seoul. Then the goddess of luck says this is all thanks to her, but the protagonist argues that it was his own individual efforts that led him to this reward. At that point, the constellation of torn lips raises objections and proposes banning the goddess of luck. The goddess, however, refuses to accept any challenge to her blessing and leaves the protagonist with no choice. Either way, he figures that since it's a platinum artifact, he can absorb 40% of its attributes before selling it, and by doing that, he'll become unbeatable against dogs and wolves during a full moon. Sometime later, he finally steps through the dungeon portal, but he's caught off guard by what's waiting on the other side, a crowd gathered for his return. The mission manager thinks Shin Sang-yun actually pulled off the mission on his own and feels relieved since she hadn't believed it was even possible. Then Kim Miso speaks up. She says that in the mission manager's position, she wouldn't have let a rookie take on that mission alone either. But after what she witnessed, she thinks they should start paying closer attention to Shin Sang-yun. The protagonist had almost forgotten about the staff member, and he actually feels bad for her when he realizes just how worried she had been about his safety. After that, several guild recruiters try to win him over, but Kim Miso cuts in, claiming the guy already has business to take care of with her, which keeps him from accepting offers from other guilds. With a convincing look, Kim Miso asks if the protagonist doesn't agree. He says he does, but he can't stop wondering what Kim Miso is up to. Sometime later, the protagonist is in a limousine. He checks his phone and notices the reward amount hit his account pretty fast. Kim Miso says that's thanks to her rank A carriers, who cleared the dungeon quickly, but she also claims her influence played a part. The protagonist thanks her for that. But right after, Kim Miso moves quickly, and Shin Sang-yun gets the feeling she's up to something. Being very direct about it, Kim Miso invites him to join her guild, Eden. After receiving the invitation, the protagonist comments that the girl seems pretty confident he's going to accept. Kim Miso replies that there's a reason her guild is called Eden, and that Shin Sang-yun won't regret joining. The protagonist thinks that, before his regression, he was a member of a small guild, but somehow felt comfortable being accepted by someone. Everything worked out fine, until a traumatic accident happened. Because of that, he believes the best thing to do in his current state is to keep working alone. So he turns down the invitation. Kim Miso asks if he's planning to start a one-man guild. The protagonist compliments her on the insight, and she points out that she's the daughter of a major corporation's director. Given Shin Sang-yun's abilities, it wasn't hard to figure out what he was planning, but what matters to her is being the only one who knows more about Shin Sang-yun. Hearing that, the protagonist realizes the girl has laid all her cards on the table and shown genuine interest in him. On top of that, she built a mutually beneficial relationship, which shows just how good she is at negotiating. Sometime later, in the C-rank player's city, the protagonist heads to an apartment for a visit and hears an acquisition proposal. He comments that, despite the smile on the person in charge, the proposal sounds pretty intimidating. Either way, she claims the deal was good for both sides and thanks him for choosing them. Shin Sang-yun thinks everything happened faster than expected and figures it must have been the work of the goddess of luck. He moves in, which isn't hard since he doesn't have much to carry. In his new home, he thinks about how much has happened in such a short period of time. After the sudden regression, he spent 2 days trying to make sense of what had just happened. Not sure what to do, he had to think fast. But the feeling of blood rushing through his veins made him feel motivated because he tasted the flavor of youth again. With that, he refused to stand still and wanted to chase after everything he hadn't been able to do in his past life. Since then, the opportunities kept coming. Back in the present, Shin Sang-yun is caught off guard when he finds out that a famous reporter called Miss Kim, Park Jung-min from the Adventurer's Gazette, says news travels fast and that he heard Shin Sang-hyun is in the same area as Kim Miso. He quickly asks if they can talk about it. Shortly after, Kim Miso drops the protagonist off at home, but tells him that she and her guild are planning to explore an unknown portal soon, and she'd like to know if he wants to come along. She explains it's a 4-person team for players at level 120 or below, and that she understands if he he doesn't want to go. But the protagonist accepts right away. He turned down the guild invitation so coldly that the girl figured he'd turn this one down too. But the protagonist is genuinely interested in entering a high-level portal and doesn't care about the rest. Dungeons tend to be fixed locations, so the monsters and traps follow a predictable pattern. Portals, on the other hand, are usually dynamic, making them the opposite of dungeons. Even so, Shin Sang-yeon knows that the higher the risk, the higher the reward. On top of that, when entering an unknown portal for the first time, an adventurer has a chance to find a high-level artifact. He also figures that Kim Miso probably has plenty of experience with unknown portals. Otherwise, there's no way she could ignore debuffs like the one from the Black Wolf. Since he accepted, Kim Miso says they should exchange contact information. She hands him her phone so he can type in his number, but ends up revealing something she didn't mean to. The girl immediately realizes her mistake and gets flustered. She says her head has been a mess lately. Even so, they manage to exchange contacts. As soon as he gets home, the protagonist thinks something strange was bothering Kim Miso, but figures every high-level player must go through rough patches. He has his own problems too, but he knows he can't go around talking about his past. After all, he can't even imagine what would happen if someone found out about his regression. Thinking about that, he wonders what happened to the constellation that helped him regress. They spent years together, and he finds himself worried about his old friend. Far from there, in the Eden Guild's VIP lounge, Cho Jinho, one of the guild members, says he was looking forward to talking with Kim Miso, but notices the girl won't take her eyes off her phone. She explains she's talking with Shin Sang-yeon, since the two of them are about to enter a portal together. Cho Jinho asks if this Shin Sang-yeon is the same guy who has a stronger stun than his, and also the same one who turned down joining Eden. At that, he suggests Kim Miso has fallen for the protagonist, something the girl denies. She says she just found Shin Sang-yeon's abilities incredible, including his swordsmanship, which is the best she's ever seen. Cho Jinho replies that it doesn't matter how good that guy is, because there's no way Shin Sang-yeon is better than him. Sometime later, at a training ground, the protagonist calls Kim Miso to talk about the portal they mentioned before. She lets him know the portal appeared near Chuni Station, and that every area up to the midpoint checkpoint has already been scouted. She also sends over the detailed information for Shin Sang-yeon to look through. After going over everything, the protagonist thinks this lines up perfectly with the new ability he just acquired. He thanks her for the info and says he'll reach out once he's ready. At that, Yoon Dae-kyung comments that the Shin Sang-yeon he used to know has now become a celebrity, and that he can barely believe it. The protagonist says it's not really like that, and Yoon Dae-kyung figures from his reaction that he still hasn't gotten the call. Shin Sang-yeon asks what he's talking about, and Yoon Dae-kyung reveals that the protagonist just showed up on the front page of the Player Gazette. That catches Shin Sang-yeon completely off guard, since he had no idea. The last thing he wanted was to draw attention to himself, and he wonders how they managed to do that without checking with him first. Yoon Dae-kyung says the guy should be happy, since it'll bring him visibility. But that's exactly what the protagonist doesn't want, and he tells Yoon Dae-kyung he called him there for something else entirely. Yoon Dae-kyung then hands the protagonist a bag, saying it has everything he needs. Shin Sang-yeon thanks him for the items, but Yoon Dae-kyung says there's no need, since he's not giving anything away for free. He mentions these are his old items, and asks why Shin Sang-yeon is buying them instead of new artifacts. The protagonist says he just wants to keep Yoon Dae-kyung's legacy alive, but the old man isn't buying that flimsy excuse. Shin Sang-yeon knows that old artifacts have a better absorption rate, but he can't explain that, so he tries to come up with whatever convenient excuse he can. Just then, a young woman arrives. She says she's late because she couldn't find a parking spot nearby, but that she's ready to get started. Yoon Dae-kyung explains that this woman is the appraiser who'll help with the item deal, and that he invited her to make sure neither of them ends up on the losing end. The appraiser then gets to work and uses her abilities to evaluate the items. Once she's done, she confirms everything checks out and says they can go ahead with the deal. But before closing the deal, Yoon Dae-kyung asks Shin Sang-yeon to let him take a look at his swordsmanship. The protagonist says he's not good enough for that yet. Yoon Dae-kyung, though, argues that after everything they've been through, he's not foolish enough to miss the fact that the protagonist is hiding his true strength. Shin Sang-yeon was hoping things wouldn't come to this. Still, he figures ignoring someone who just wants to give their best is plain rude. So he tells Yoon Dae-kyung to show him what he's got, and asks the appraiser to step back. Yoon Dae-kyung starts showing off his sword skills. Right away, the protagonist notices the old man has gotten stronger since the last time they met, and can tell he's been training ever since. But Shin Sang-yeon picks up on something off and asks Yoon Dae-kyung to stop. He then asks if there's something wrong with his left arm. Surprised, Yoon Dae-kyung asks how the kid knows. knows that. The protagonist explains that every time Yoon Dae-kyung attacks with his right hand, he flexes his left shoulder too quickly, as if he's being careful with it. Yoon Dae-kyung says it's from an old injury. He explains that most of his wounds were on the left side of his body, so he tends to be more careful with it. In that case, the protagonist says he can fix that. According to Shin Sang-yeon, old injuries can be overcome, as long as the person doesn't try to hide from their weaknesses, but instead chooses to face them head-on. He tells Yoon Dae-kyung he can work through it, from the way he grips the sword to the way he breathes. He also says it won't be easy at first, but that over time he'll get past it. The appraiser, who had been watching from a distance after stepping back, is confused by what's going on and wonders what exactly these two are doing. After a while, the protagonist thinks he made a good deal buying those items, even though he spent over 400 million won. Still, he remembers that the appraiser had a strange look on her face when everything was done. Either way, he needs to devour the artifacts as soon as possible, since he wants to do it before the portal mission. But while distracted in traffic, the protagonist almost runs someone over. Worried, he asks if anyone got hurt. At that moment, a man walks up saying he's tired of waiting for Shin Sang-yeon and tells him to get out of the car immediately. The protagonist doesn't understand what's going on, but he's startled by the hostile behavior of the guy outside. The aggressive man says that if Shin Sang-yeon doesn't get out right now, he'll burn along with the car. With that, the protagonist realizes he's seen these guys before. They're Choi Young-cheol and Cho Seung-ho, both from the Utopia Guild. Choi Young-cheol is known for hunting down adventurers weaker than him and beating them, while Cho Seung-ho is the lackey who films everything for him. The protagonist recalls that back in the day, the two were famous for making extreme videos until it all came to an end when they crossed the line and got arrested. In other words, they're nothing but walking trash. Outside, the two just want to provoke Shin Sang-yeon. The plan is to beat him and then post the video online. The protagonist, for his part, just wanted to get home and devour the artifacts, but now he's going to have to deal with this inconvenient situation. After stepping out of the car, Shin Sang-yeon asks what they want. Choi Young-cheol tells him not to rush, saying he's there to settle something with Shin Sang-yeon. He says a lot of people have been complaining about him driving around in a terrible car, and that he came to get rid of that awful thing Shin Sang-yeon calls a vehicle. Then Choi Young-cheol kicks the protagonist's car, damaging it, and tells him to grab his things and leave the complex as soon as possible, or things will get worse. Meanwhile, some people notice that Choi Young-cheol and his partner are picking a fight with someone. It doesn't take long for them to recognize the protagonist, since his face has been all over the headlines recently. In the middle of all this, Choi Young-cheol tells his partner to look up Shin Sang-hyun online. Cho Seung-ho says that apparently Shin Sang-hyun recently completed a level 100 mission solo and had Kim Miso's support. However, Choi Young-cheol says the protagonist doesn't look that strong and asks if that information is accurate. Cho Seung-ho replies that it must be a mistake, because if Kim Miso was really on that mission, she must have done everything, and the rookie just took the credit. So the two figure they can beat him easily, and that the rookie's sudden fame will help give their next video some buzz. While Cho Seung-ho starts a live stream, Choi Young-cheol approaches the protagonist. He challenges Shin Sang-hyun to a duel, and says the loser has to leave the adventurer's city for good. He also says that if Shin Sang-hyun wins, they'll leave him alone forever, so he has nothing to lose. The protagonist immediately agrees to the duel, but he says he'll only accept if Choi Young-cheol throws in 500 million, plus the watch on his wrist. Otherwise, he can get out of his face. Choi Young-cheol is furious at the sheer nerve of it. Then Cho Seung-ho gets his friend's attention and says the live stream chat went crazy after hearing Shin Sang-hyun's proposal. At that, the protagonist asks if Choi Young-cheol suddenly got scared. Cornered in the trap he set for himself, Choi Young-cheol has nowhere to run. With that, the two get ready to duel. Some people start gathering around to watch the fight up close. The protagonist prepares to fight, while Choi Young-cheol tries to act tough, claiming that 500 million is nothing to him, and that he can't believe he's going to lose. He also tells Shin Sang-hyun he can back out while he still can. Then the duel begins, and Choi Young-cheol says he won't go easy on him, but he's quickly caught off guard, because the protagonist comes at him with everything he's got and says he won't go easy either. Even if his opponent begs for mercy, everything is being streamed live online. Because of that, Kim Miso is able to watch the duel from home, and is surprised to see the trouble Shin Sang-hyun has gotten himself into. Kim Miso is both scared and worried. She recognizes Choi Young-cheol from the Utopia Guild, a rank B adventurer who does whatever he wants just because his uncle is the guild master. Then another girl walks over and asks if something's going on. Her name is Shin Tairi, also from the Eden Guild. She wants to know why Miso looks so anxious. When she sees the protagonist on the screen, she asks if that isn't the guy Miso tried to recruit. Kim Miso confirms it, but says she doesn't understand why Shin Sang-hyun agreed to duel some random idiot. Shin Tairi comments that the guy's movements look pretty good. good. Back to the fight, Choi Young-chul starts to panic after nearly taking a direct hit. Shaken, he calls the protagonist a lying cheater and says he's going to put him in his place. Shin Sang-yoon uses his sword to block the attack, and when Choi Young-chul realizes it did nothing, he panics all over again. Not just him, but everyone watching is stunned by Shin Sang-yoon's strength, to the point where they're wondering where someone like that even came from. The protagonist, for his part, thinks that for the first time since his regression, his body is doing exactly what he wants it to. 3 hours earlier, he had just wrapped up the equipment acquisition deal and thanked the appraiser for her time. She said she was just doing her job. Excited, Yoon Dae-kyung said he'd just made some good money off the deal and asked if they'd like to go out for drinks. Shin Sang-yeon turned him down, saying he had an urgent commitment, which left Yoon Dae-kyung far from happy. He still pushed the appraiser not to bail on him either, but she said she had somewhere else to be. For the protagonist, that important commitment was devouring his new artifacts as soon as possible. Once he managed to get away from the group, Shin Sang-yeon took a moment to check the artifacts' stats and noticed their adhesion rate was 90%. The goddess of luck took credit for that herself. Shin Sang-yeon had expected 10% at most, but was happy to have such a high rate for used equipment. Taking the opportunity, he mentioned that the goddess of luck is quite popular among the constellations and asked if she'd ever heard of a constellation called the Late Exemplary Student. At that question, the goddess thought Shin Sang-yeon was trying to replace her with someone else, but the protagonist clarified that wasn't it. He explained that this constellation was important to him and that he just wanted to know if she was doing well. The goddess of luck said she was feeling generous and would help him gather information about that constellation. With that settled, the protagonist figured he'd better get back to his meal and transfigured the artifacts into a fine feast. He was practically drooling with joy, as the items had turned into his 5 favorite dishes. Even though they were used, Shin Sang-yeon realized the artifacts were proving quite useful, and he found himself wondering just how strong he'd become after devouring all of them. Back in the present, he concludes that even though he's gotten stronger, the effects of the artifacts are a little disappointing. Furious, his opponent decides to go all out. Watching from afar, Kim Miso grows worried about the protagonist. Unlike her, Shin Tae-ri is confident that Shin Sang-yeon will dodge the attack. The protagonist, for his part, charges forward and tells his opponent not to forget he owes him 500 million plus a watch. From outside the fight, Cho Se-young-ho thinks the protagonist walked right into the trap. Mid-attack, Shin Sang-hyun is frozen in place, and Choi Young-chul declares that the victory is his. Shin Sang-hyun's feet end up frozen, and for a moment he can't move. Shin Tae-ri is surprised, since she didn't expect him to get caught that easily. But her friend says it's not quite like that. The Shin Sang-hyun she knows can get out of something like this without any trouble, and there's a reason she tried to recruit him for her guild. Sure enough, Shin Sang-hyun breaks free from the trap shortly after. Even Choi Young-chul is caught off guard. He can't believe a rookie is capable of removing negative status effects, but he's about to find out just how wrong he is, because the protagonist comes at him from above and catches him completely off guard. Shin Sang-hyun says that the fact that this is a training duel is the only thing that saved his opponent from being finished off, because otherwise he wouldn't be breathing anymore. With that, the duel ends, and every single one of Choi Young-chul's followers watches his defeat live. Watching the stream, Cho Se-young-ho notices that this rookie has a strange aura and wonders who this guy even is. Shin Tae-ri watches the protagonist closely and picks up on the fact that he has a type of awakening ability. She doesn't know exactly what it is, but judging by his darkened eyes, she thinks it might be something psychedelic. This ability causes extreme fatigue whenever the user takes damage, which means Shin Sang-hyun is confident enough to act as if he's not going to get hit at all. Confused, Kim Miso points out that Shin Sang-hyun didn't use that ability the last time they were together. Her friend says there are 2 possibilities. Either Shin Sang-hyun had no reason to use it back then, or he has a way of picking up new abilities in a very short period of time. Far away, at the appraiser's place, she realizes she missed something in her evaluation. One of the artifacts Shin Sang-hyun bought had a hidden ability, and he should have tested it before using the artifact in combat. She identifies it as a psychedelic ability, but she also notices that the activation rate is extremely low, so he would have needed a lot of luck to pull it off. Little does she know that the protagonist is overflowing with luck, since he made a contract with the constellation responsible for that very attribute. Speaking of Shin Sang-hyun, he asks his defeated opponent if he's going to hold up his end of the deal. Furious, Choi Young-chul thinks he only lost because he let his guard down, since he believed he was up against a simple show-off of a rookie. He refuses to accept the defeat and decides he needs to fight seriously now. He plans to fall back first and then come up with a new attack strategy, because he never would have agreed to this duel if he'd known from the start who he was dealing with. Choi Young-chul blames his friend for giving him false information about the opponent, and he's already thinking about what he'll do to him once this fight is over. The protagonist attacks anyway, telling his opponent not to afford himself the luxury of getting distracted. Shin Shin Sang-hyun says that if his opponent still isn't satisfied, he'll give him a bigger taste of his power, and he can do it as many times as needed, since training mode prevents either of them from being taken out by a fatal blow. Desperate, Choi Young-chul begs the protagonist to stop and says he accepts the defeat, promising to pay what was agreed. Shin Sang-hyun replies that this fight ended a while ago, and that now he's just getting his revenge. His opponent doesn't understand why, but Shin Sang-hyun says it's all his fault. A flashback takes us back 3 days earlier, when the protagonist went to the dealership where his car was being serviced. The person in charge told him the vehicle had been fixed, but warned that he'd need to get a new car soon, since the current one wasn't going to hold up much longer. Shin Sang-hyun wasn't expecting to hear that. The mechanic explained that the car was old and kept breaking down, and that no matter how attached the owner was to it, he should think about getting a new one. Hearing that, the protagonist actually got emotional because he was deeply attached to his car. Back in the present, he tells his opponent that he shouldn't have done what he did to his car. Choi Young-chul begs for forgiveness and says he didn't mean any harm. Even so, nothing stops him from taking a serious beating, and the entire crowd around them, along with everyone watching online, gets to see a pathetic man crying while he takes a brutal thrashing. Seeing his friend in that state, Cho Seung-cho starts to panic. At that point, he doesn't care about the audience or any of that anymore. He just wants to get out of there as fast as possible. But to his surprise, someone stops him. His guild manager shows up and says that he and his friend caused a serious problem. Moon Baekhyun, on the other hand, finds the whole situation pretty interesting, since he didn't expect a newcomer to take down Choi Young-chul that easily. With that, the manager turns to Shin Sang-hyun and says he's there to settle everything peacefully, offering compensation for any damage his guys caused. The protagonist then asks exactly who he's talking to. Moon Baekhyun is taken aback by that level of arrogance. He notices that Shin Sang-hyun is very confident, but also picks up on the fact that his skill doesn't match his level and figures the guy is hiding something. Either way, Moon Baekhyun formally introduces himself as the manager of the Utopia Guild and says he'd like to make a proposal. He states that the guild will cover any damage his guys caused, and that, in the interest of building a good relationship, he promises to handle everything in the best way possible. The protagonist then says that 2 billion should take care of it. The manager is shocked by the amount, but understands why it's being asked, and wants to know if Shin Sang-hyun would accept installment payments. Sometime later, the protagonist gets home but barely makes it inside, since his door is surrounded by journalists. After dodging some uncomfortable questions, he decides to focus on what actually matters. Shin Sang-hyun thinks about how he needs to prepare for the upcoming raid. He's been really busy and had to leave the prep to the last minute. Still, he figures he'll be fine after the progress he's made recently. He looks over his stats and notices they've gone up quite a bit, and he's eager to test the upgrades in the field. Even so, he's still a little worried, because he realizes that during the fight against the wolf, he lacked the skill to handle things the way he would have wanted. His attacks were limited compared to his previous life, and if the opponents he'd faced recently had been just a bit stronger, he might have lost. With that in mind, Shin Sang-hyun concludes that he needs to focus on getting even stronger, because he doesn't want to end up the same way he did before. On top of that, he also thinks about the second invasion that will happen in 2040, and feels like he has to prevent that from happening no matter what. But to do that, he'll need to grow stronger, just like the knight who saved him when he was a child. Then the protagonist's phone rings. Reporter Park Jung-min says they have an interview scheduled, and asks if Shin Sang-hyun is going to show up. The protagonist had completely forgotten about it. He thinks about how the raid starts at 7, and the interview is at 2 in the afternoon. On top of that, he only has 15 minutes, so if he wants to make it on time, he's going to have to run. As he leaves the house, the reporters try to surround him again, but the protagonist gives off a dark aura and tells everyone to get out of his way. A little while later, Park Jung-min spots the protagonist, but notices something seems different about him. He quickly picks up on the fact that Shin Sang-hyun's appearance has changed, and asks if he was in a dungeon before coming. Shin Sang-hyun says no, but apologizes for being late. Either way, the journalist kicks off the interview and says he'd like to hear about the recent events Shin Sang-hyun has been involved in, since he's currently the center of attention among adventurers. Park Jung-min points out that levels and experience don't mean much under the new ranking system, and that with such a striking debut, everyone has been praising Shin Sang-hyun. He then asks if he's aware that several guilds are interested in recruiting him. The protagonist says he's received a few invitations recently, but figures everyone wants to hear about the Eden Guild. The journalist, however, asks if he's received any invitations from foreign guilds. Park Jung-min reveals that a total of 5 foreign guilds have filed an official request with the Korean Adventurers Association for an identity verification. Most of those guilds are known for recruiting new players, but Shin Sang-hyun's recent achievements must have caught their attention. The protagonist, for his part, is just now realizing he's drawn drawing a lot more attention than he thought. After the interview, he walks through the streets thinking over what he heard. He reflects on how in his past life he had to grind hard and never got any real recognition, but now even international guilds are coming after him. Then he runs into Kim Miso. The girl says they still have time before the portal appears. However, the protagonist notices that Miss Miso isn't alone, and he knows exactly who the girl standing beside her is. Kim Miso explains that her friend was eager to meet the protagonist, so she had to bring her along. She introduces the two of them formally, and Shin Tairi is thrilled to finally meet Shin Sang-hyun. The protagonist, for his part, thinks there's no way he wouldn't know who she is. There isn't a single adventurer in the country who doesn't know Shin Tairi. She's famous even internationally, and she's also the reason Eden Guild is as popular as it is. Shin Sang-hyun feels lucky just to be meeting her, but to his surprise, Terry asks him for a favor. She says she'd like to fight him in a training match. Kim Miso scolds her friend, saying she shouldn't be challenging someone she just met. Tairi defends herself though, saying she needs to know if Shin Sang-hyun is worthy of joining her guild. Miso apologizes on her friend's behalf, saying she has this bad habit of challenging people just for fun. But to both of their surprise, the protagonist says he doesn't mind a duel. He tells them that if they want to get straight to it, he can settle this right now. Shin Sang-hyun adds that it's not every day one of the best players in the country gives a newcomer an opportunity like this. Terry then says her friend has a good eye for recruiting people and lets him know she's ready to start. The protagonist thinks he's no match for Terry, but he also doesn't want to let this opportunity slip away. He knows it won't be easy, even if it's just a training match. Either way, he's not backing down now, and he figures it's better to go all in from the start. Kim Miso, on the other hand, is completely unprepared for this, and she can't figure out how things ended up here. Tairi warns him she's attacking first, and uses a power to move at high speed, which leaves Shin Sang-hyun pretty disoriented. He thinks he can't afford to blink against an opponent like her, because if he does, it's over. Tairi likes what she sees and enjoys the duel, while Shin Sang-hyun does his best to dodge. She tells him he's got good moves, but adds that she still has a few tricks up her sleeve and won't stop until she lands a hit. The protagonist realizes his opponent is both stronger and faster than him, so he starts thinking that, just like he did before, he'll have to block out his vision and rely on all his other senses if he wants to win. When Miso notices this, she calls him crazy for closing his eyes while fighting her friend. She doesn't understand why he's doing it, but Shin Sang-hyun knows exactly what he's doing. The moment Terry attacks, he manages to defend himself. Terry notices how focused he is and says most swordsmen wouldn't be able to pull something like that off. After all, it takes a lot of experience to do something like that. She says it feels like she's up against a veteran. The protagonist then tells Terry she doesn't have to hold back and asks her to go all out next time. Terry is confused by the request. Shin Sang-hyun explains that he's not trying to be arrogant. He just wants to see the true power of a high-level player. He figures he won't get another chance like this, so he asks her not to go easy on him. Kim Miso asks her friend not to do it. Terry responds that she can't give 100% of what she has, but she can show him her top speed. The protagonist says, that's enough. As Tairi gets ready, he thinks he can't afford to make a single mistake. His opponent charges toward him, and Shin Sang-hyun braces for the impact. When she launches at full speed, the force of Terry's strike shatters every window around them. The protagonist swings his sword in an attempt to stop her, but Terry uses her illusion ability and slips around behind him. With that, she lands a hit on Shin Sang-hyun. After the strike, Terry asks if he's okay. The protagonist says he is, despite taking the hit, and admits he's surprised that Tairi used her ability against him. Shin Sang-hyun complains about a headache, and Tairi apologizes for using her ability against him. The protagonist says he's fine, and thanks her for not holding back. Tairi then says that next time, instead of fighting, she'd like to just talk with him, something Shin Sang-hyun doesn't even consider refusing. At that moment, Kim Miso warns them that the raid is about to start. She also says it would be better for her friend to write a full report on everything that happened today, because Terry might not have realized just how dangerous what she did was. Terry apologizes and, before leaving, asks Shin Sang-hyun to call her when the raid is over. The protagonist, for his part, thinks that whether he likes it or not, this is the first time he's lost a fight since coming back. Even though it was an unexpected encounter, he now feels like he has a new goal he needs to overcome, and he won't give up until he surpasses Terry someday. Sometime later, they arrive at Chunui Station. In front of the portal, Kim Miso introduces the team. The other two members say it's a pleasure to finally meet Shin Sang-hyun, and he replies that it's an honor to be standing alongside such experienced players. The young man introduces himself as Park Taesok, a mage specialized in the ignition ability. Shin Sang-hyun notes that ignition also means pyromancy, the same ability as Choi Young-chol, whom he defeated before. But Park Taesok says that unlike others, he spent his entire life conjuring flames and claims that his are stronger than anyone else's. Even so, he's at stage C chi of the blue flame and believes he still has a lot of room to grow. The protagonist says the guy seems pretty strong and that he made the right call focusing on a single ability to become a specialist. After all, the reason Choi lost is that instead of mastering one specific ability, he spread his energy trying to use different, weaker ones. Next, Kim Miso says the girl is a bit shy and introduces her as Kang Joo-hee, a spatial grip, a mage specialized in spatial connection abilities. Kang Joo-hee says her teammate already showed off his powers, so she figures she should do the same. Miso, however, asks her not to, since it's dangerous. The protagonist senses an incredibly strong power and says it's completely different from what a spatial grip is supposed to be capable of. He notices that her ability is to conjure portals, which lets her or another team member move through them. Kang Joo-hee, even with her shyness, says that's what she can do and hopes to be useful in the raid. The protagonist believes she'll be more than useful and thinks to himself that this girl is the final piece of a perfect team combination. Shin Sang-hyun fights at close range, Kim Miso attacks from a distance, Park Tae-suk covers the gaps, and Kang Joo-hee helps with escape routes if needed. The protagonist thinks all they're missing is a healer for this to be a perfect team. On top of that, he notices the chemistry between them is incredible and realizes this isn't the first time these three have worked together. To Shin Sang-hyun, that kind of bond is crucial for a team's survival. He's thought that way since his past life, but back in the present, Kim Miso asks what Shin Sang-hyun is thinking about. She hopes he didn't get too hurt during the fight with her friend. The protagonist says he just got lost in his thoughts for a second, but he's ready to keep going now. As they enter, they come face to face with an unknown frozen world. Shin Sang-hyun takes the moment to thank his teammate, saying that if it weren't for Park Tae-suk's heat buff, they'd all be frozen by now. Miso comments that the weather wasn't like this the last time. Then she notices that Shin Sang-hyun has another weapon besides his longsword and asks why he's only now showing up with that shorter sword. The protagonist says he had a feeling he'd need a smaller blade in case the fight called for more movement. But he knows the real reason he hadn't used that short sword before is simply that he didn't have it. Shortly after, the group runs into the first enemy, and Kim Miso organizes the team for combat. Kang Joo-hee conjures one of her portals. The giant Cyclops tries to attack Miso, but only hits the ground, since Miso and Shin Sang-hyun have already gone through the portal and are now on top of the monster. The protagonist tells his teammate to watch his back while he pushes forward toward the Cyclops. The monster is caught off guard by the sudden attack. From above, Miso calls for a combined strike, and Tae-seok picks up on it right away. Kim Miso fires an arrow, blinding the Cyclops. That gives Shin Sang-hyun everything he needs to land his hit. After the strike, he tells Joo-hee to move. From a distance, she opens another portal, but the monster tries to act faster and swings at the protagonist. Once again, it only hits the ground. Shin Sang-hyun reappears behind the monster, high up with a clear view from above. The rest of the team gets ready, but the protagonist moves fast and takes the Cyclops out with a single finishing blow. His teammates are stunned by his strength and ask what exactly they just witnessed. They didn't think one hit would be enough to bring the enemy down. That's when Miso speaks up and says it's her fault for not warning the others about what Shin Sang-hyun is capable of. She admits she had the same reaction the first time she saw him fight, and that he hasn't even shown everything he's got. The protagonist, for his part, thinks that even though this is his first time fighting alongside these adventurers, they're doing really well together. That starts to give him a good feeling about the team, and he asks if they're ready to keep going. A little while later, the group has taken down several Cyclopes. Park Tae-suk is beyond excited about the protagonist's performance, saying he's the best swordsman he's ever had by his side. Shin Sang-hyun thanks him for the compliment and is glad to be helping the team. Miso then points out that Tae-suk barely gets a chance to fight for real, which is why he's so worked up. The protagonist figures that for most mages, not having a reliable swordsman nearby leaves no choice but to hang back. He's starting to think all this praise is a bit much. And it's not just the mage. Kim Miso compliments him too. She says she should be used to watching him in action by now, but he always finds a way to surprise her. A flashback shows that before this, Miso and Tae-seok had been fighting ogres when a larger group closed in on them. Both felt cornered with no way out. But the protagonist asked his ally to open a portal right in front of the enemies. Miso warned him not to, saying the demonic ogre was stronger than the others. Even so, she realized right then that there was no talking him out of it, so all she could do was trust Shin Sang-hyun. Joo-hee opened the portal directly in front of the enemy, and Shin Sang-hyun launched forward at full speed. He cut straight through the monster in a single strike, leaving his teammates completely stunned. After all, not just anyone can take down an enemy like that so easily. Back in the present, Miso says she's never seen a skill that powerful before, but since the team is doing well, she thinks she can put more trust in them. Then Joo-hee tells everyone to be quiet. She says they've finally reached where they wanted to go. From the edge of a cliff, they spot an enemy guarding a location. A hellhound Cerberus appears to be sleeping. Joo-hee says that's good, because maybe they can slip past it using a portal. The protagonist disagrees though. He doesn't want to leave the chance to take down that monster for someone else. Miso says they should consider all their options before acting, but she can tell that Shin Sang-hyun is itching for a fight. Worried, she asks if he has a plan. Shin Sang-hyun Sang-hyun says it might be better for him to move in alone. He figures there's no time to explain the details. For his night age skill to work, the moon needs to be fully visible, and if even a single cloud gets in the way, the whole plan falls apart. With that in mind, he decides he has to move as soon as possible, even if his teammates don't agree. The moment he gets close to the enemy, the Cerberus reveals it was only pretending to sleep. That doesn't worry Shin Sang-hyun at all because he already expected it. On the other side, Miso starts to panic, but Juhi notices something strange, since the Cerberus doesn't seem to be reacting. Now that she thinks about it, Miso remembers that the first time she was there, the enemy was extremely aggressive, but in front of Shin Sang-hyun, it turned cautious. She doesn't understand what's going on. Then she realizes the monster isn't trying to attack, it's obeying Shin Sang-hyun. The Cerberus recognizes a power greater than its own, and so it shows submission. For Shin Sang-hyun, that was easier than expected. Either way, he takes the enemy down, even though he feels a little bad doing it to a creature that was so obedient. But his opinion changes when he receives a new healing skill. Then the rest of the team catches up. The protagonist panics because he didn't think they'd get there so fast. He remembers he's never told anyone about his true ability, and he wasn't expecting to have to deal with that so soon. On top of that, he starts to worry that Miso might demand to keep the artifact dropped by the monster. Contrary to what he expected, Kim Miso tells Shin Sang-hyun he can keep the artifact, since he defeated the monster on his own. He thanks her, but asks her not to mention it to the others. Miso says there's no reason to, since everyone thinks the same way she does. With that, the protagonist thinks it was a close call, but from now on he'll need to be more careful when collecting drops. Then the team leader says she and the others will head on ahead to give Shin Sang-hyun time to prepare. After all, she's noticed that whenever he gets an artifact, he does something with it, and she doesn't want the others to find out. Shin Sang-hyun is caught off guard. Miso says she's known about it for a while. In fact, she claims she figured it out back when they finished their first mission together. As she was about to leave, she wondered why Shin Sang-hyun wanted to stay inside alone. That's when she discovered his secret. Hearing that, the protagonist feels cornered and doesn't know what to say. Kim Miso, for her part, tells him he's an adventurer who performs rituals. She also says that adventurers like that show up from time to time, so there's no reason for Shin Sang-hyun to worry, because his secret is safe with her. After that, she asks the rest of the team to give him some privacy. The protagonist realizes there's been a big misunderstanding, but luckily his real secret wasn't discovered. For now, he figures it's better to devour the artifact quickly before moving on. After a while, the team continues their journey. Juhi opens a portal at the protagonist's request. Miso thanks her for the effort, and Shin Sang-hyun does the same, saying she was essential to his plan. At that, Juhi asks if this is really going to work, because she doesn't understand why gathering all the defeated monsters in one place would make the dungeon boss appear. Shin Sang-hyun explains that the boss of this dungeon will do anything for food, and it'll definitely show up to claim such easy prey. Still confused, Juhi asks how he knows that. Dodging the question, Shin Sang-hyun simply asks the mage to set the bodies on fire. After that, the group hides near the bonfire. Taesuk comments that 20 minutes have already passed and nothing has happened. Right after that, the protagonist spots the dungeon boss and says the enemy has finally shown up. Now everyone needs to get ready for the ambush. The dungeon's final boss is a massive cold brown bear, and it's hungry for fresh meat. As she reads the situation, Kim Miso thinks that Shin Sang-hyun has been the reason the mission is going well so far, but she's starting to believe this situation might be beyond his abilities. In her view, even a strong adventurer has limits, and a dangerous situation like this one has ended more than a few careers. A few minutes earlier, the team had gathered. The protagonist said he would act as bait, claiming it was the fastest and safest way for the group to clear the raid. He explained that most giant monsters share a similar trait that activates when their health drops to a certain point. They enter a state of gluttony. A monster in that state gets stronger and far more violent, starting to devour everything around it. That's why he had gathered the ogre corpses in one place. But Shin Sang-hyun had also added something to the monster's meal. While the mage piled up the bodies, the others collected juniper wood, which works as a powerful sedative. Park Tae-sok figured the only problem would be lowering the monster's health enough to trigger the gluttony state. The protagonist said he would create the right opening for them to deal damage, and asked the group to trust him. Back in the present, Shin Sang-hyun is starting to think this plan wasn't so great after all. He's one step away from being wiped out, and the monster doesn't look tired in the slightest. He believed he could handle the situation, but he's realizing now that he was wrong. On top of that, he can't figure out why the enemy is so much stronger than him. Shin Sang-hyun is starting to think he might actually die if things keep going this way, so instead of defending, he decides it's better to dodge the attacks. But even that doesn't go as planned, because the enemy has surprisingly fast reflexes, which makes the protagonist think jumping in was a terrible idea. His team steps in to help though. Kim Miso fires arrows at the enemy, and thanks to that creates an opening. The protagonist says he's only alive because of her. Now he wants to turn things around, and he launches a full charge at the bear. In doing so, Shin Sang-hyun not only deals damage, but also manages to freeze the enemy for a moment. He thinks this is the advantage he needed, and pushes forward with everything he has. Even frozen, the enemy manages to move. From a distance, Miso says it's Park Tae-seok's turn to act. With that, the mage charges up his flames and warns Shin Sang-hyun to get clear. The protagonist quickly moves out of range, leaving the bear as the target. When the hit lands, the enemy feels the full force of the blow, enough to shatter its armor. Even Shin Sang-hyun is impressed by that attack. He thinks he's finally managed to bring the enemy's health down enough, and sure enough, the enemy's status shifts to the gluttony form. The bear rises, ready to devour everything around it. That catches Shin Sang-hyun off guard. He was expecting a slightly less aggressive result. From a distance, Park Tae-seok notices that the monster has transformed so much, it looks like a completely different creature. Then the team leader asks how Kang Joo-hee is doing. Tae-seok says his teammate is still getting ready. Joo-hee is conjuring a portal much larger than what she's used to. But Tae-seok says their biggest concern isn't Joo-hee. It's whether Shin Sang-hyun will survive long enough for the portal to be ready. Back to the protagonist, he thinks the plan isn't going the way it should, and that's a serious problem. His life and his teammates' lives are on the line. In that case, he figures he'd better give everything he has, and he concludes the best way to do that is to face the danger head-on instead of running. Then Joo-hee says she's finally done with the preparations and is starting the teleport, while Shin Sang-hyun is on the verge of being devoured. At the last second, the portal hits the enemy and sends it far away. Using that much power nearly makes Joo-hee pass out, which worries the rest of the team. As for Shin Sang-hyun, he realizes he took way too big a risk. If his attack hadn't landed, he would have been torn apart by the bear. But in the end, he's glad the plan worked out and that nobody got seriously hurt. The bear tears through its mountain of ogres quickly, then turns its attention to its new prey. But since the meat was poisoned, it doesn't take long for the effects to kick in, and the bear collapses to the ground. Kim Miso thanks the protagonist for his help, since the idea was his. The raid is finally complete, and Shin Sang-hyun gets the bonuses he earned. The team leader thanks everyone for their work, including Joo-hee's efforts. Joo-hee, for her part, says the plan helped her understand the limits of her ability. Shin Sang-hyun thanks her for agreeing to the last-minute plan and says he hopes they get to work together again someday. On top of that, the protagonist thinks that if he hadn't been with a team, this might have been his last mission. In his previous life, raids through unknown portals always ended in tragedy. Most portals with good rewards had a 90% survival rate, since the majority of teams were made up of experienced members, but the protagonist and his companions were part of the other 10%, which meant his team got smaller every time they came back from a raid. He barely avoided the same fate, and because of that, he got used to saying goodbye. Still, as important as it is to get stronger, he wants to do things differently this time around. He doesn't want to watch another teammate get wiped out like before. Before leaving, the protagonist wants to take a look at the rewards. The bonus for defeating the bear appears, and as each person steps forward, they'll receive their share. Shin Sang-hyun raises his hand, but the goddess of luck insists he watch as she reveals the truth behind her powers. He decides to trust his constellation, and hopes the goddess's powers will make his reward even better. The moment he accesses the reward, Shin Sang-hyun receives a list of unique artifacts and is asked to choose one. He's never seen anything like this before, and he's thrilled to be getting such a valuable reward. On top of that, thanks to the goddess of luck, a hidden effect exclusive to unique rank artifacts has been unlocked. Shin Sang-hyun had forgotten, but this was one of the conditions of his contract with the goddess. With that in mind, she expects a proper thank you for her efforts. The protagonist notices his teammates are distracted and figures it's fine to go ahead and pick his artifact. He doesn't even need to think about it much, since he already had one in mind, and he chooses the Great Spirit Sword of Battle. Shin Sang-hyun chose that sword because he already knew about its unique attributes, but the moment he grabs it, it immediately drops to the ground. Shin Sang-hyun wonders why the weapon is so heavy. Kim Miso walks over and asks if something's wrong. The protagonist plays it off and says no. Changing the subject, he mentions that each of his teammates got a great artifact. The group's leader says they only managed that thanks to Shin Sang-hyun's help, and because of that, they want to pay him back properly. She and the others agreed to give him the dungeon boss's magic stone. Shin Sang-hyun says that's not necessary, but Joo-hee argues that everyone agreed on it, since they wouldn't have made it without him. The protagonist then thanks his teammates for their generosity. He thinks that adding all the rewards he earned plus the stone, the total resale value comes out to around 150 million. Just thinking about it, he's laughing on the inside. Either way, they finally step out of the portal. Kim Miso invites the protagonist to a celebration, but he thinks it's better to save that for another time. Miso says they'll see each other again, so it's no problem, but she asks if she can call him whenever she needs to. As much as he wanted to say no, Shin Sang-hyun thinks he shouldn't, so he agrees to stay in touch. Grateful, Kim Miso says her goodbyes. Shin Sang-hyun is caught off guard by her reaction, since he never expected to see Miso with such a bright expression on her face. Her reaction was so spontaneous that it left the rest of the team a little flustered. After leaving the portal with the others, the protagonist couldn't take his sword home because it was too heavy, so he had to absorb it right there on the spot. With that taken care of, he decides to check his stats to see how much he's leveled up. His attributes went up quite a bit, but he decides to put everything into luck. When he does, his critical hit rate reaches 600%, surpassing anything he had in his past life. Shin Sang-hyun figures he should keep going at this pace, since it's clearly working, but then something happens that breaks his focus. New constellations appear to speak with him. Among them are the Lion King, Blackbeard, and the Shadow Huntress. Surprised, the protagonist never expected to receive a new visit from constellations so soon, but he figures that's also thanks to the goddess of luck, since she's quite popular among the constellations. As he looks them over, Shin Sang-hyun thinks the Lion King and Blackbeard are pretty well known, since they were real heroes who became constellations. Even so, their intimidating presence makes him uncomfortable. But the constellation that surprised him the most was the Shadow Huntress, because she's the most dangerous one among them, and the last constellation he'd ever want to run into. She's a bounty hunter, who goes after adventurers who committed violations or received extreme benefits by mistake. In his past life, Shin Sang-hyun heard of cases where the Shadow Huntress ruined the careers of certain adventurers for considering them cheaters. So he's afraid the same thing might happen to him. The protagonist thinks that forming a contract with a constellation isn't something he should ignore, and that the goddess of luck is more than enough. But at the same time, he wonders if he should really turn down such a rare opportunity. He knows that above these constellations there are the mythic ones, and forming a contract with one of them is extremely rare. So he decides to make a risky bet, and turns down forming a contract with any other constellation for now. The only one satisfied with that is the goddess of luck, because the others leave in anger. But before she goes, the Shadow Huntress says she'll find out Shin Sang-hyun's secrets. After that, the protagonist feels uneasy, but he knows there's nothing he can do about it. Either way, he thinks the best way to keep his mind busy is by working, so he notices there's a nearby portal full of wolves and doesn't want to miss the opportunity, even knowing he just came out of a portal and hasn't rested enough. Shin Sang-hyun believes he can't stop until the mythic constellations take an interest in him. Far from there, at the Adventurers Association headquarters, a portal analysis team is going about their normal work when a receptionist receives an unusual call. She's extremely alarmed by what she finds out and alerts the others that a portal has opened at exit 1 of Bupyeong Station, saying that all available fighters need to head to the location immediately. But on the other end of the phone, the person reports that there's an adventurer fighting at the scene. The woman who made the call says he's fighting the monsters alone. The receptionist asks all civilians to fall back immediately, since the situation is dangerous. The woman understands, but says that the adventurer in front of her doesn't seem to be in any danger. The space between realities, created 11 years ago after the first break, became an unpredictable disaster, where monsters invade the normal world and destroy everything in their path. But what's unpredictable for most people isn't for our protagonist. After all, he's already seen all of this happen up close, so now he knows exactly how to act. 10 minutes earlier, Shin Sang-hyun was already prepared. He got off the subway and waited. Shortly after, a rift appeared, exactly as he remembered. For one very specific moment, that rift became a real tragedy. In the past, countless people were caught in it, but now he's there to stop that from happening. Shin Sang-hyun grew up in an orphanage from an early age, so he doesn't remember what his parents looked like. During his time there, he never felt sad or depressed, but everything changed when he lost the people he knew. He only survived because someone was there to save him. Now he wants to do the same for others, and to do that, he needs to be the strongest. Then the monsters start to appear. Ferocious, monstrous wolves get ready to attack, but the protagonist activates one of his skills, and with it he leaves the enemies intimidated. Noticing it worked, Shin Sang-hyun is pleased, but he realizes he's still not getting the results he expected. He figures it's because of the moon's absence. Since it's completely covered, the wolves aren't submitting to him. Either way, the protagonist thinks that just makes things more fun. Instead of forcing the monsters to surrender, he'll have to take them all out with his own hands, so he takes the chance to test his new skills in action. Shin Sang-hyun attacks, but his blade doesn't hit the enemy directly. Instead, the sword creates a vortex of energy, and through it the wolves are swallowed whole. Not only that, but the other enemies are caught in it too, to the point where the protagonist sends some of them flying back into the portal. Shin Sang-hyun realizes his strike covers a very wide area, and that's going to be extremely useful going forward. He feels an enormous satisfaction in taking down monsters without putting in much effort. On top of that, his luck attribute increases the damage of his critical hits. The protagonist notes that the enemies weren't taken out in a single strike, which means his attack wasn't lethal, so this time he'll have to hit harder. Nearby, a car pulls up. The people inside spot the rift ahead and stop the vehicle. Adventurers from the association step out of the car. Lee Hyun asks who called them there. A woman says it was her, because she saw monsters coming out of the rift. The adventurer tells her to get somewhere safe and says he'll handle it. His partner, Lee Jung, draws his attention to something and says they weren't the first ones to arrive. The two of them see the protagonist fighting the monsters and wonder how that even happened. Either way, Lee Hyun sees the situation is dangerous and figures this adventurer won't be able to handle it alone, so he gets ready to help. But the protagonist says he doesn't need help and doesn't want anyone interfering. Lee Jung asks if he's sure about that, and Shin Sang-hyun confirms it. After all, he wants to test his skills without any interference. Shin Sang-hyun activates all his buffs at once and attacks to see what the impact will be. The result couldn't be anything else because with that strike, he sends the enemy flying. The two association adventurers watch everything in awe, while Shin Sang-hyun thinks his throw was magnificent. The others are stunned as they witness his strength. After the monster is defeated, the adventurers approach. They say that thanks to Shin Sang-hyun, no one got hurt, and that it's a real miracle, since rifts like this one usually cause massive damage. Lee Hyun thanks the protagonist for what he did, but asks if he's planning to go through the portal. He says high-level players usually do that and asks to go along with Shin Sang-hyun. The other adventurer isn't too keen on the idea, but Lee Hyun is convinced he needs to go and tries to talk Shin Sang-hyun into taking them with him. The protagonist, for his part, says he's going in, and if they want to come along, he won't stop them. The protagonist leads the way with the other adventurers following behind. Shin Sang-hyun moves so fast that the others can barely keep up. Lee Hyun comments that the protagonist must have been blessed with incredible combat instincts, and that he wants to watch from a distance and try to pick something up. Lee Jung, though, feels like something is still off, because Shin Sang-hyun shouldn't have that much energy left after such an intense battle outside. Thinking it over, Lee Hyun realizes his partner has a point, since even just watching the fight from the sidelines, he could tell how difficult it was. Either way, they push forward through the area, and what they find inside catches them off guard. The group gets surrounded by a pack of hunter wolves. The protagonist already knew this was coming. He grabs one of the wolves and uses it as a living shield to protect himself and the others. The rest of the pack fires their arrows, but not a single shot hits the group. Realizing the two aren't much help, Shin Sang-hyun starts thinking it was a mistake to bring them along, but it's too late to send them running now. He knows he'll have to handle this situation on his own to keep everyone safe. He stops playing defense and starts launching ranged attacks. That draws the enemy's attention away, and he closes in on the archers to take them out. With that, Shin Sang-hyun clears out the upper section of the area and celebrates making it to the second floor. But doing that also pulls the enemy's focus straight to him. He gets attacked and manages to defend himself just in time, though he realizes it was a close call. On top of that, he notices this particular enemy is a champion among the wolves. In other words, a boss. This champion knows how to use a shield, and unlike other monsters, fights with actual strategy. Seeing that, the protagonist knows he'll need to be precise, because one mistake could be the end of him. So he works on reducing the damage while blocking the enemy's attacks. Shin Sang-hyun lands a strike so powerful, it punches right through the enemy's shield. Even he is surprised by his own strength, since he didn't expect his attack to be that effective. Not only did he destroy the shield, he landed a clean hit and took the monster down with relative ease. He figures it must be the full moon buff. If that's the case, Shin Sang-hyun thinks wiping out the rest of the wolves will be even easier. While the adventurers are struggling on the first floor, the protagonist clears out every enemy in a matter of seconds. After that, he finds a pair of swift shoes, an item that boosts the user's speed. He knows cobalt wolves tend to drop items like these, and the timing couldn't be better. He then checks on his two helpers and notices that, despite the trouble they ran into, both of them did better than expected. Shin Sang-hyun presses on with the raid, thinking the finish line is going to be easier to reach than he thought. A while later, he arrives at the entrance to a chamber and figures it can only be the final boss room. The place is both an arena and a treasure room. Walking in, Shin Sang-hyun is stunned to see so much gold scattered across the floor. He doesn't think twice before trying to collect it all, but it was just a distraction, because the boss had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for its target to fall into the trap. The boss fires its crossbow, trying to catch the protagonist off guard, but his reflexes let him get out of the way just in time. Right after, Shin Sang-hyun goes on the counterattack and tries to land a hit with his sword. The enemy manages to dodge, which catches the protagonist off guard. That's when he realizes he's up against an intelligent enemy, and he's not wrong, because this enemy is the Kobold Emperor, the supreme leader of the wolves. The enemy fires again, and Shin Sang-hyun barely manages to avoid getting hit. He realizes that if he's not careful with this opponent, he's going to be in serious trouble. On top of that, he decides this enemy is pretty annoying for putting up this much resistance. Outside, the two adventurers notice the fight has already started on the other side of the door. They come in apologizing for being late, but freeze when they see who Shin Sang-hyun is up against. Just the enemy's aura is enough to fill them with dread. They're so shaken that they can barely move. That means it's up to the protagonist to handle things on his own. Shin Sang-hyun attacks, telling the enemy it was a mistake to dare ignore him. He swings his sword and lands a hit on the boss, but even after taking the blow, the monster is barely scratched thanks to its resistance. The protagonist realizes he's going to have to push a lot harder if he wants to bring this enemy down, and to make things worse, he's going to have to babysit, since the two adventurers are completely useless at this point. He notices that the monster's negative aura was enough to paralyze two S-rank adventurers, which puts this enemy in a whole different league. Either way, Shin Sang-hyun figures that unlike most people, he doesn't scare easily, so he keeps pressing with his attacks. But the enemy doesn't just stand there. It activates its defenses and fires back with a few arrows. The protagonist has no choice but to fall back. The enemy does the same, pulling away from close range. It's already figured out that its best shot against the protagonist is to fight from a distance. Shin Sang-hyun notices the enemy is a lot smarter than he expected, and closing the gap between them is going to be harder now. He also realizes the enemy recovers faster than he does. One small miscalculation could be his downfall. Shin Sang-hyun figures that if he doesn't deal with this quickly, the enemy is going to gain the upper hand. Looking around the arena, the protagonist spots the enemy's treasure, and that gives him an idea. Meanwhile, the two adventurers talk among themselves. Lee Hyun says he's never been hit by a status condition like this before, and that the fear left him completely paralyzed. His partner points out that Shin Sang-hyun wasn't affected by the same effect at all. Unlike them, the protagonist is fighting at full force. Lee Hyun has confidence in the protagonist's abilities, but he still has a bad feeling about this. Then he notices something alarming. The arrows the boss has been firing are sinking into the floor. Lee Hyun immediately tries to warn the protagonist about the trap, but Shin Sang-hyun doesn't catch on in time. He steps onto the pile of gold and instantly feels his feet being pulled under. The enemy has its target exactly where it wanted, and fires again. Shin Sang-hyun tries to react, but he's completely cornered. Because of that, the arrow finds its mark. Then the enemy moves in to finish the job, but the protagonist surprises it, saying he has a few tricks of his own up his sleeve. Shin Sang-hyun tells the enemy that if it were truly intelligent, it would have noticed he had stopped dodging the attacks. Now it's time to turn things around. He charges a special ability into his sword and strikes, tearing through the surroundings and dealing serious damage to the enemy. From a distance, Lee Jung notices that the protagonist used the gold coins scattered across the floor as projectiles against the enemy. From Lee Hyun's perspective, he's witnessing something he's never seen before, because he's never come across a player with combat instincts this sharp. The protagonist then closes in on the boss and tells it that it's the most persistent enemy he's faced so far. But that doesn't mean he's giving up. Furious, the enemy tries to attack, but in doing so, its weapon is destroyed. Left completely vulnerable, the boss takes a fatal blow from its opponent. After finally defeating the boss, the protagonist gains new attributes and levels up. On top of that, he also gets some great drops. When he checks what the boss left behind, Shin Sang-hyun realizes these items are much better than usual, and he can't wait to devour them. Then the two adventurers rush over to him, desperate. They say they need to get out of there as soon as possible, because the rift is about to close and everyone could get trapped inside. Shin Sang-hyun had gotten so caught up with the drops that he completely forgot about that. With no other choice, he grabs only the boss drop and leaves everything else behind, since the adventurers physically dragged him out while he still wanted to collect it all. Outside, a few curious onlookers are waiting for the adventurers to return. When they finally see someone coming out of the rift, the crowd is happy they made it, but they're caught off guard by the sad expressions on the adventurers' faces and can't figure out why they look so down. A reporter tries to interview Shin Sang-hyun and asks what he has to say after saving the city. The protagonist can barely get a response out, he's that shaken up. Far from there, in a training room, Cho Lee-hyun, a mage from the Adventurers Association, is fighting golems. But she's not alone, because Terry is also there practicing her skills. Unlike the mage, Terry uses close-range attacks instead of magic. She moves fast and lands hits on the enemies with ease. Her skill with bladed weapons is unmatched, and even in a training session, she doesn't hold back against the golems. Tyri slices through stone golems like they're nothing, which leaves her colleague seriously impressed. Tyri then thinks to herself that she took on this training so she wouldn't forget the feeling she had when she fought Shin Sang-hyun. She can't wait to fight him again, and she regrets not asking for the protagonist's contact information. In the middle of all this, Terry spots a breaking news alert on her system screen about a mysterious rift that appeared out of nowhere. The reporter says the situation has already been handled, and that he's with the person responsible for resolving everything. At that point, the reporter asks Shin Sang-hyun what it was like to clear a rift with no casualties on his team. The protagonist answers that he simply did his job. Seeing this, Tairi says she never expected to run into Shin Sang-hyun again like this. During the interview, the reporter mentions that according to the association, the boss was level 150 and wants to know what it was like to take down such a powerful enemy. Shin Sang-hyun says that even though his level was well below the enemy's, he doesn't think that's a deciding factor in a fight. Tairi thinks he's right, and judging by his tone, she can tell that Shin Sang-hyun is fully aware of his own abilities. The first time they met, she already noticed he had a certain maturity about him, which only makes her more curious about Shin Sang-hyun. Tairi considers the possibility that he has a contract with a constellation just like she does, because that would explain a lot. Speaking of the protagonist, he's at home, looking at his new items. Without wasting any time, Shin Sang-hyun enters the unconscious space and gets excited because it's finally time to devour everything. Shin Sang-hyun recalls that when the age of players began, most warriors fit the stereotype of a bodybuilder. Over time, though, as new monsters started appearing, those who only cared about physical strength and ignored everything else became easy prey. But things changed when Gyeong-soo, the sword demon, appeared for the first time, because he proved that physical strength wasn't the only attribute an adventurer needed. Gyeong-soo gave up heavy armor and a bulked-up body to create a perfect balance of strength and mobility, becoming an adventurer ready for any situation. In his past life, Shin Sang-hyun neglected that, but now he wants to do things differently. Back in the present, he transforms the items into food, but he notices that only 2 of them turned into something appetizing, because one of them became something pretty disgusting. Even so, he has no choice but to devour it all. Sometime later, outside Shin Sang-hyun's house, a crowd is waiting for him. A few security guards are trying to hold back journalists who keep trying to push their way in. Fed up with all the hassle, Shin Sang-hyun hired the guards to keep unwanted visitors away. He'd really love to get some fresh air after his last meal, but with so many people surrounding his house, that's impossible. Shin Sang-hyun feels a little bored since he has nothing scheduled, and figures that resting for a bit every now and then never hurt anyone. But then his phone rings. Kim Ji-hae from the Adventurers Association calls and mentions that they met the last time Shin Sang-hyun visited the building where she works. She explains she's calling because the organization would like to present Shin Sang-hyun with a plaque for clearing the rift. The protagonist isn't too fond of this kind of attention, especially knowing the danger that's still ahead and how many players will be exposed to it. He thinks the rift that closed is just the tip of the iceberg, but in the meantime, he needs to stay out of the spotlight, so he turns down the offer. Kim Ji-hae tells him to at least pick up the dungeon priority card, because it'll give him access to the silent solo dungeon, the very one he wanted so badly. Shin Sang-hyun is surprised to hear his request was approved. The attendant explains that because of his recent achievements, the organization reconsidered and gave him the approval he needed. The protagonist thinks to himself that this dungeon is one where all the monsters use the silence ability. A flashback shows that in the past, during a conversation with his teammate, the ally brought up his younger sister. He said that before she passed, his sister had gone into a silent dungeon, but because she relied too heavily on her abilities, she didn't stand a chance against the enemies. The brother said that unlike him, his sister had no melee attack attributes, and that he wished he could go back in time to stop her from going in. Back in the present, Shin Sang-hyun says he'll take the dungeon card because he plans to use it soon. Sometime later, Shin Sang-hyun is enjoying his new car. He thinks that unlike his previous vehicle, this one has rear-wheel drive, which is great. He wasn't really looking to spend money on it, but after appearing on television, getting around on public transportation without drawing attention became too difficult. On the way, Kim Ji-hae calls him. She lets him know that today is the day he's scheduled to use the silent dungeon, and that a staff member will be on site to provide the appropriate assistance. Shin Sang-hyun thinks that a week has passed since the secret rift, and that he was so focused on training he barely noticed the time go by. Either way, he really wants to test his new abilities and is eager to do so. However, he notices a commotion in traffic. He thinks there shouldn't be a traffic jam at that hour, since he made a point of choosing a less busy time. Worried, he wonders if another rift appeared out of nowhere or something like that. He gets his answer when he sees what's in front of him. A player is being interviewed in front of a portal, and Shin Sang-hyun immediately recognizes Do Gyeong-soo, the sword demon. The portal appeared right in the middle of an intersection, and that drew the attention of both Gyeong-soo and his fans. A reporter asks how Gyeong-soo feels about being so popular, and he answers that it's an honor. The interviewer finds that response too lazy, since she'd like to hear something more exciting. So she asks another question, asking for his perspective on the upcoming raid. Gyeong-soo simply says he'll do what he always does, defeat monsters. Even with another shallow answer, the interviewer thinks that kind of sincerity has a unique charm. Meanwhile, Shin Sang-hyun tries to go on his way, but doing so ends up drawing attention. He's immediately recognized by journalists, and some say that a meeting between legends like that is a rare thing. One of Gyeong-soo's allies mentions that Shin Sang-hyun is an adventurer who became famous after clearing a rift on his own. But Gyeong-soo reveals he already knew that, which surprises his ally. A reporter questions Shin Sang-hyun's sudden sudden appearance and asks if he's there to challenge Gyungsu. The protagonist denies it and says it's nothing more than a coincidence. At that moment, he looks over at Gyungsu and sees him smiling. Confused, Shin Sang-hyun wonders if that's a smile of contempt. Regardless of what Gyungsu thinks of him, he knows he still has a long way to go before he can challenge the sword demon someday. For his part, Gyungsu says it's time to go. He thinks that over the years he's met plenty of ambitious players, but Shin Sang-hyun is different because he didn't look at him with admiration, but rather like he was looking at an obstacle to overcome. With that, Gyungsu figures he'll definitely run into Shin Sang-hyun again. After stepping out of the spotlight, Shin Sang-hyun heads to the silent dungeon. He thinks Gyungsu is truly on another level, because even standing still, he showed no openings. Either way, he figures the bigger the goal, the more satisfying it'll be to surpass it. When he arrives, he notices other adventurers are also trying to use the silent dungeon, but Kim Jahai's team is keeping them away. He walks over and asks what the commotion is about. Irritated, one of the adventurers says that just because he got famous, Shin Sang-hyun shouldn't get special treatment, since there's a code of honor among adventurers that has to be respected. Shin Sang-hyun thinks everything is playing out just as he expected. He had some doubts about the dates, but he can see his memory didn't fail him. He remembers that this is the day his teammate's sister died in the silent dungeon. He just didn't know she was such a hot-headed girl. He concludes that the siblings' personalities are very different, practically opposites. Either way, he figures there's no reason to hold back and he'll take a firm stance. With that, he tells her that no matter how wronged she feels, that doesn't give her the right to talk to people that way. He also says he's acting according to the schedule set by the association itself, so he's not doing anything wrong, and that he doesn't want to waste any more time talking because he's going into the dungeon. The girl doesn't back down and says she won't forget this easily. Either way, Shin Sang-hyun enters the dungeon alone. Right away, he picks up a rotten smell, but he knows that's no coincidence, since every monster in there is undead. One of them rises up through the ground and grabs Shin Sang-hyun's leg. He's immediately hit by the silence effect and is unable to use his powers for a period of time. Even so, he was already prepared for that and uses sword attacks to take the enemy down. Right after, several more monsters show up in the area because of the commotion. Shin Sang-hyun realizes that a single touch from these monsters silences him, so he needs to avoid that from here on out. With that, he concludes he'll have to eliminate all of them before they can reach him. Far from there, the 4th Reconnaissance Team of the Adventurers Association holds a meeting. The person in charge says they need to talk about the topic of the moment, the adventurer Shin Sang-hyun, who's been getting a lot of attention lately. One of those present mentions that Shin Sang-hyun stood up to Gyungsu and thought that was pretty impressive. Even so, he wants to know how a player who awakened not long ago is already making such a name for himself. An Ik-yun, the leader of the 4th team, says this is the same guy the others praise so highly, but he's not sure Shin Sang-hyun is really everything people are saying. Shin Min-jae, the team's vice leader, also has his doubts, because according to him, impressive players show up all the time. Since they don't know the full scope of Shin Sang-hyun's abilities, they need to hold back when it comes to judging his achievements. Lee Ga-hee disagrees though, arguing that Shin Sang-hyun doesn't seem like someone who manipulates or lies. Some of those present think this is the 100th time Miss Lee has disagreed with the vice leader, and they get a little anxious waiting to see how he'll react. The team leader asks if Lee Ga-hee has something to share. She's the team's strategist, and she says she's been following Shin Sang-hyun personally. Over the past few days, she put together a breakdown of his data and recommends everyone do the same, because once they do, they'll reach the same conclusion she did. Shin Sang-hyun is not your average adventurer. She pulls up the growth charts of a typical player, then shows Shin Sang-hyun's charts, making it clear just how much he's progressed. Seeing that, many of them can't believe the numbers. The vice leader claims Lee Ga-hee has lost her ability to evaluate a player's skill objectively. Shin Min-jae doesn't buy the data, and says that if any of this were actually true, Shin Sang-hyun would be growing at the same rate as the sword demon. Lee Ga-hee insists her data is correct, since she personally reviewed it. On top of that, she reveals she met with every one of Shin Sang-hyun's former allies. A flashback shows her interviewing Yoon Dae-kyung and asking whether the protagonist had any unusual traits. At the time, Yoon Dae-kyung said Shin Sang-hyun's abilities were incredible and that he'd never seen anyone use stun the way he does. But he said that's not even the most impressive part. The reason he believes Shin Sang-hyun is truly special comes down to his remarkable natural combat instincts. Park Tae-suk and Kang Joo-hee were also interviewed, and both praised the protagonist's performance in combat. They said Shin Sang-hyun isn't impressive just because he's above average. What stands out is that he always seems to be one step ahead of any challenge, because even as a newcomer, he acts like a veteran with years of experience. Hearing that, Lee Ga-hee asks for more details. Park Tae-suk says that fighting alongside Shin Sang-hyun made him realize just how incredible the protagonist's instincts are, as if he can sense what the opponent is going to do before it even happens. He says that for most adventurers, there are moments of weakness. but Shin Sang-hyun fights like his body moves before he even thinks about it. In other words, it's as if he has a sixth sense built specifically for combat, something a normal adventurer would need years of training to develop. No matter what situation Shin Sang-hyun finds himself in, he always finds a way to come out on top, making even the most powerful enemy look weak against him. After hearing everything, Lee Ga-hee sums up the protagonist's core ability as an instinct that borders on seeing the future. Back in the meeting, she says that even as a newcomer, Shin Sang-hyun's abilities are compared to those of rank A players or beyond. Lee Ga-hee believes there's even a possibility that Shin Sang-hyun is rank S. The vice leader doesn't buy that claim. On top of that, he says no one has the ability to predict the future, let alone know where a rift will appear before it even opens. Lee Ga-hee, for her part, says the most accepted theory is that Shin Sang-hyun somehow traveled back in time. The team leader understands that Shin Sang-hyun is genuinely skilled, but thinks that theory doesn't hold up. Either way, he says that from now on, Lee Ga-hee will be in charge of keeping a personal eye on Shin Sang-hyun, but she'll have to do it alone. She agrees and promises to give it her best. Back to the protagonist, he's feeling sick from the unbearable smell of the place. To make things worse, he's tired of being caught off guard, since enemies keep appearing out of nowhere. But stopping to think, he remembers his detection skill and figures it would have been a lot easier if he'd used it from the start. With detection active, he can now see exactly where the enemies are hiding. Then he spots a fly and wonders if it's a monster. The moment he touches it, he gets his answer, because it explodes and nearly blows Shin Sang-hyun sky high. He managed to react in time to avoid being taken out, but he still took some burns. The worst part is that flies like that mean there's a mage-type monster nearby. So the right move is to get out of there as fast as possible. But new explosions go off right next to him, making it clear he wasn't wrong about the enemy mages. Back in the meeting, the vice leader says he understands why Lee Ga-hee has high expectations for Shin Sang-hyun, but asks if she managed to find out anything beyond that combat sense, like a hidden ability or something along those lines. Because if the analysis is right, Shin Sang-hyun has some unique way of picking up new skills. Lee Ga-hee says she has nothing confirmed, but she does have a hypothesis. And if she's right, Shin Sang-hyun is a player beyond comprehension, someone who might not be possible to explain with words alone. A few days before entering the silent dungeon, Shin Sang-hyun had been training to get ready. On top of his regular training, he ran simulations of the fight he had with the previous boss. After 3 days of that, he came to a conclusion. Aside from special circumstances where consuming artifacts is possible, the way to pick up new skills is pretty straightforward: consistent training. But that only works for passive skills, since active ones only show up during combat or as monster drops. Most players don't share that information, because the conditions for active skills to appear are very specific. Shin Sang-hyun, though, has years of experience behind him. The mages who tried to blow him up hadn't counted on that. They definitely didn't believe anyone could escape their trap, so they start launching new attacks, hoping to take out the intruder. Shin Sang-hyun, for his part, thinks it took him long enough to acquire his defensive sword skill. The only downside is not being able to move forward while using it. But to him, every rule has an exception, and he's willing to take the risk. With that, he combines his attack and defense skills and pushes toward the enemies. The mages try to counter with magic and pull off a coordinated strike, but Shin Sang-hyun says it's too late. With a single blow, he manages to hit every one of them. But that was just the beginning, since the dungeon boss is still waiting for him. For now, Shin Sang-hyun focuses on what's right in front of him, the drop from defeating the mages. He realizes it's a purple stone, a magic artifact easily worth around 100 million. Even so, he figures it's better to leave the item for after he clears the dungeon, since he's eager to push all the way through. Using his active detection skill, he picks up that there's only a single enemy ahead, and wonders where the rest went. To his surprise, the boss appears right behind him. Shin Sang-hyun thinks it's too late to react, so instead of trying to block, he leaps upward. The enemy's attack hits the ground and destroys everything around it. With no ground to land on, he understands why there are no monsters nearby. They must have all fled the moment the boss appeared, which means this enemy is capable of taking out even its own allies. After all, this monster isn't called the Death Knight for nothing. Shin Sang-hyun doesn't know why this enemy is here instead of at the center of the dungeon, but he knows one thing. This monster killed his friend's sister, so he wants to avenge his friend's pain, now that he's standing in front of the one responsible. Still, even as an intermediate boss, the Death Knight is no pushover, and every strike it lands reminds Shin Sang-hyun exactly who he's up against. As the name suggests, this knight rose from death itself, the soul of a knight bound to an immortal body. Its main ability, called Swamp of Silence, is always active, and anyone hit by it is automatically silenced. That's why the association doesn't let just anyone enter this dungeon, because the risks are far too high for those who aren't prepared. On top of that, Shin Sang-hyun knows very well that even though this dungeon is classified as dangerous, it's far more challenging than the association lets on. The real threat lies in the soul trapped inside the Death Knight, because if that soul belonged to a highly trained knight, the difficulty spikes dramatically. In his past life, the association took too long to figure that out, and because of that, many people died trying to clear this dungeon. After the change, only rank A and rank S adventurers were allowed inside. Shin Sang-hyun himself never dared to take on this dungeon back then. Now that he's feeling firsthand what others went through, he's almost regretting his decision. By rushing into a challenge this big, he put himself in unnecessary danger, and it could cost him his life. But this isn't the first time Shin Sang-hyun has faced death, and he's already tired of it. Still, he realizes old habits never really die, because whenever he's in real danger, he ends up doubting his own abilities, and he concludes that if he keeps thinking that way, he'll never truly change, so he knows he can't back down now. Instead, he's going to face the danger head-on, even if that's the last thing he does in his new life. The enemy notices that Shin Sang-hyun is weakened and tries to land a finishing blow, but he manages to dodge. Even so, he knows he needs to recover some of his stamina to keep fighting. Right after that, he spots more enemies nearby, monsters hiding in the area. And on top of that, he catches sight of an exit. Without hesitating, he makes a run for the gate. On the way, he gets surrounded by zombie monsters. Shin Sang-hyun was already expecting that and isn't surprised, but he still has to fight. He jumps straight into combat against the zombies, though he notices the boss is closing in. Either way, he uses the smaller monsters to his advantage, taking them down to recover stamina. But it's not enough yet, so he decides to push forward. After all that running, he reaches a different arena. The place is crawling with monsters, which is actually good news since he can use his ability and recover stamina by defeating the mobs. But the boss catches Shin Sang-hyun off guard, arriving at the location much faster than expected. The enemy attacks and he dodges, but then he realizes the strike wasn't aimed at him. The knight was targeting the other monsters. He had figured out that Shin Sang-hyun was using the zombies to recover and wipe them all out before he could do it again. Now, he has the protagonist exactly where he wants him. That puts Shin Sang-hyun in a desperate spot because his plan has failed. With no other option, he falls back and decides to fight with what he has, even without enough attack power. He goes on the offensive, knowing he can't keep running forever. But as he does, he gets caught off guard again. The enemy anticipated the move and struck first. The hit lands hard, and Shin Sang-hyun takes severe damage. The little stamina he had left is nearly gone from that one blow. Even so, he knows he can't give up. In that moment, he thinks back to his past, to the time he watched his friend die in his arms. The allied knight made one last request, asking to be buried beside his younger sister. Shin Sang-hyun tried to keep him alive, but his friend already knew he was going. There was nothing to be done, and he carried the guilt from that loss for the rest of his life. Back in the present, he's standing in front of an opponent who is clearly stronger than him. He thinks he made a mistake by underestimating the enemy. He believed he was ready to face someone like this, and he rushed in without preparing properly. But that doesn't mean he's going to give up now, because this is a fight for his life. For him, it's not just about revenge for what happened in the past. It's about proving something to himself. Shin Sang-hyun knows he couldn't protect the people he loved before, and to make sure that never happens again, he can't back down from a challenge. At first, he thought his skills were simply inferior to the enemy's, but he just realized something. The real reason the enemy has the upper hand is something else entirely. As the monster attacks, Shin Sang-hyun keeps dodging. He doesn't stay in one place, forcing the enemy to move faster and faster. Shin Sang-hyun figures that if the enemy can't land a hit, all that raw power becomes irrelevant. So he strikes back, going for a critical hit, and it connects. His charged attack stacks 600% damage and lands square on the knight. Even so, the enemy still isn't down, and Shin Sang-hyun knows it. He's not going to make a big deal out of it, since he knew from the start this wouldn't be easy. Realizing he's at a disadvantage, the enemy tries to use his remaining flames to self-destruct. Shin Sang-hyun is confused, not understanding why, since he expected the boss to fight to the very end. But when he sees how much energy the enemy still has left, the truth hits him. The knight is planning to blow himself up and take everything around him with him, including Shin Sang-hyun. Once Shin Sang-hyun figures out the enemy's real plan, he knows he can't get close, because if he does, he dies too. It's the kind of desperate trap a cornered prey sets when it sees no way out. Even so, he's not about to let himself get caught in it. Knowing he only has a few seconds to get away, he bolts as far as he can, but the moment he does, the boss starts chasing him. The enemy isn't giving up on taking Shin Sang-hyun down with him, so on top of running, he has to dodge the attacks coming his way. He manages, even though it's not easy, but the knight is relentless and keeps trying to drag him into the blast. Then the boss charges up a special attack. He has the ability to control his sword from a distance, and he's planning to use it to hit Shin Sang-hyun. Shin Sang-hyun manages to avoid the strike and sends the enemy's sword flying. Even so, the boss doesn't stop and keeps up the chase. Shin Sang-hyun tries to run as fast as he can, but his internal organs are screaming at him to stop. Either way, he knows he has to keep going no matter the risk. On top of escaping the monster, he's also racing against the clock. Then he trips and goes down, leaving himself wide open in front of the enemy. Desperate for a way out, he tries to think fast, because he knows exactly what happens if he doesn't get out of this. Back in the past, he had entered this same dungeon and cleared out a wave of zombies along the way. His goal was to help his friend get revenge for what happened to his friend's sister. Shin Sang-yoon pushed through the dungeon, clearing the path, while his friend stayed in the back. Frustrated, Shin Sang-yoon said the fight was unfair because the enemies kept using silence on him, and he had nothing to work with besides his basic attacks. His friend suggested he use a recovery potion, but Shin Sang-hyun didn't see the point, since potions also lose their effect under silence. Even so, his friend told him he needed to be smarter about it. He could use a potion at least once, and while it lasted, he'd get the benefits out of it. That way, a potion wouldn't just be a regular resource, it would be a last resort. Back then, Shin Sang-hyun replied that if he were as smart as his friend, he'd be a high-level adventurer, not just some nobody. Back in the present, Shin Sang-hyun thinks there's still a lot he can learn from his friend, so he uses a potion to clear the silence effect and gets back in the fight. Even if the effect isn't permanent, all he needs is a temporary opening. The enemy is furious, but Shin Sang-hyun knows that at this point he can't afford a single mistake, because he burned through all his mana to make this strategy work. While he's hanging from a chandelier, the enemy attacks. At the last second, Shin Sang-hyun lets go, and as he falls, the enemy slams into the ceiling. He knows he can't survive another hit, so it's now or never. The enemy quickly pulls free from the ceiling and comes after him again. Shin Sang-hyun starts thinking he should have jumped from the chandelier 1 second later, but then he realizes his mistake started the moment he underestimated this enemy, because if he hadn't done that, he wouldn't have had to push himself this hard to win. On top of that, he starts to wonder if his regression was even worth it. Just as the enemy is almost on top of him, it starts to fall apart completely. Shin Sang-hyun thinks he got lucky because the boss never managed to finish what he started. With that, he concludes his regression is going to keep going a little longer. After the enemy crumbles, Shin Sang-hyun gets a bonus for the victory. Not only that, he earns more experience than he's ever gotten from any other dungeon. His health is restored, but he notices his stamina isn't. He figures that must be some kind of penalty for pushing his powers to the limit. Even with the win, he thinks taking down that boss was anything but easy. He reflects on everything he went through and comes to a conclusion. From now on, he needs to focus more on his psychedelic ability. Right after that, though, the consequences catch up with him. Overdoing it with his powers leaves him in extreme pain in his internal organs. On top of that, using the psychedelic ability comes with the chance of a penalty being applied, and that's exactly what's happening now. Shin Sang-hyun knew that if he hadn't done it, the monster would have killed him, but what saved his life before is now destroying him from the inside. Meanwhile, outside the dungeon, Kim Jae-hai is anxious about Shin Sang-hyun. Unlike her, the other adventurers just think he's taking a long time to come out. Some of them figure something bad might have happened, but the girl leading the team doesn't care. She says that whatever happens inside a dungeon is entirely the result of each adventurer's own choices, and all she wants is her turn to go in. While the protagonist lies unconscious on the floor, the remaining zombies see an easy target and close in to devour him, but the goddess of luck steps in on Shin Sang-hyun's behalf. Her presence scares off every last enemy. She then tries to wake the protagonist, but quickly realizes it isn't working. Looking around, the goddess comes up with an idea to help him, and decides to lie down beside him while he sleeps. After a while, Shin Sang-hyun finally wakes up. Startled, he starts to think he was out for quite some time. But that's the least of his problems, since his body is still in serious pain, to the point where he can barely stand. He figures he pushed himself too hard, but he didn't have a choice against a monster that powerful. Then he notices that the remaining enemies apparently didn't try to attack him while he was out, which doesn't make any sense. That's when he spots the goddess of luck sleeping beside him and figures she must be behind it. He feels relieved knowing his constellation was watching over him. Even without knowing the details, he decides the best move is to get out of there as soon as possible. Right after that, he spots a magic artifact on the ground. The item is the Ring of Silence, dropped after the dungeon boss was defeated, and its special ability is to restore the user's mana at a faster rate. Furious, Shin Sang-hyun thinks that after all that effort, the reward he got is barely worth mentioning. Still, he remembers he earned a lot of experience from taking down the boss, and decides to check his stats to see how much he leveled up. That's when he realizes he hit level 83. He concludes that the real reward from this dungeon isn't the drops, but the experience. In the last dungeon he cleared, he walked out at level 58, which means that by completing the silent dungeon, he jumped 25 levels in one run. Despite the underwhelming artifact, Shin Sang-hyun thinks the mission was worth it for the experience alone. At this rate, he believes he'll soon become one of the strongest adventurers in his country. All the commotion ends up waking the goddess of luck from her nap. Shin Sang-hyun hasn't recovered enough to leave the dungeon yet, so he sets up a fire in a makeshift camp. As he does, he remembers that in his past life, this was just his routine. But in this life, it's the first time he's ever relaxed inside a dungeon. He also notices that the goddess seems a lot more at ease than he is. She tells Shin Sang-hyun to enjoy the little things in life too. just like she does. The protagonist thinks that he used to believe in that philosophy, but things are different now. There's no time to waste, since the fate of this world might rest in his hands. He then takes the chance to devour the Ring of Silence and celebrates the fact that the item transformed into something that actually looks delicious. On top of that, he thinks about how in his past life, he only ever saw food like this on YouTube, and now he actually gets to eat it. Doing so feels to Shin Sang-yun like a dream coming true. The goddess, for her part, says she's curious about how the protagonist manages to do that, claiming that this ability to devour items is extremely rare. Shin Sang-yun explains that every adventurer goes through an initial awakening, and when his turn came, that's the ability he got. The goddess says he's really lucky to have awakened with something like that, not knowing just how deep Shin Sang-yun's luck actually runs. Even as a constellation, she has no idea about his past, and he wants to keep his regression a secret. The goddess says she's also lucky to have found an adventurer with such incredible growth potential. Hearing that, Shin Sang-yun thinks that while it's true, there's someone out there with far greater potential than his. In the past, that adventurer was the greatest in the world, and no one came close. His name was Jiran Decay. He was from the United Kingdom, and his defining trait was a magical power that surpassed the strength of any monster. Compared to him, the protagonist feels pretty weak, but believes that one day he might reach that same level. Or maybe not. Either way, he says he'll trust his constellation to help him get there, and will give everything he has to show her how much she means to him. The goddess is moved hearing that, and likes it so much that she pulls the protagonist into a hug as a thank you. She also says she'll give everything she has to be the best constellation she can be by his side. That moment of joy doesn't last long, though. Shin Sang-yun only defeated the dungeon's mid-boss, and the final boss is still waiting for him. While the previous enemy was just a knight, this boss is the king of the silent dungeon. Seeing a visitor approaching, the enemy says that someone has finally shown up to put an end to his boredom and wants to see just how long his guest can keep things entertaining. The protagonist, for his part, notices that the enemy didn't attack them and waited for them to come to his door. Shin Sang-yun is grateful for that, since it gave him enough time to recover, and now he's more than ready to fight. On top of that, this time he's not alone, and because of that, he's ready to clear this dungeon once and for all. The fight kicks off and the boss goes all out, saying that every time, the rats run the moment they see him, but in the end they all get crushed, and this time won't be any different. Almost immediately, the protagonist barely dodges a magical attack. Shin Sang-hyun realizes these attacks are cutting off every opening, making it nearly impossible to move in. On top of that, he knows he can't keep dodging forever and needs to find a way to strike. He has mana to work with, but he can't waste it on attacks that won't land. Taking a moment to think, he figures out that the enemy's strategy is to drain the target's mana before they ever get a chance to use it. And honestly, it's not a bad plan. The enemy, for his part, is convinced his victory is already secured. After all, there's no way a rat, good for nothing but entertainment, can beat a king on his own turf. So he keeps attacking relentlessly, showing just how deep his mana reserves run. But the protagonist tries to stay focused, knowing that unlike before, he can't afford to blink in front of an enemy this powerful. Shin Sang-yun has already figured out that his opponent is a high-level mage with plenty of mana to burn, and one who can charge multiple powerful attacks at the same time. But he also knows that mages typically use both hands to cast spells. The reason is simple. Casting with just one hand means the spell doesn't hit with its full power. However, unlike a regular mage, the boss is using the hands of the undead lying on the ground to amplify his attacks, making the whole situation extremely difficult to deal with. Either way, Shin Sang-yun knows he needs to act the first chance he gets. As he tries to push forward, the boss tells him he just made a huge mistake and hits him with a silencing spell, the same one Shin Sang-yun hates so much. But he says he won't be needing his skills, because this time he's going all in on close combat. The enemy laughs in his face and dodges the attack, saying that won't work against him. Then the boss says he's going to put the rat in his place and charges up a fire attack, but he ends up caught off guard when a sword appears right in his face. Before he can do anything, he takes a direct hit and can't understand how that just happened. The protagonist, for his part, says that luck is his greatest ally. The enemy goes down after taking the hit and can't accept the defeat, wondering how any of this could have happened. Shin Sang-hyun tells him that for a king, the boss isn't very perceptive, and reveals that he has a skill capable of countering the silence. The boss says he already knew that, since he had been watching the protagonist during his last battle. Not only that, but he had also studied the protagonist's fighting patterns and mana capacity, and concluded he had everything he needed to win. So there was no way he could have made a mistake, because his calculations were perfect. The protagonist then says that sometimes even a lowly rat can end up surprising its predator. Outside, the girl who had been anxious to enter the dungeon notices someone coming out. She immediately spots the protagonist and says he finally made it out. But Shin Sang-yun is confused, because outside there's a much bigger crowd than when he went in, and he asks what's going on. Several reporters try to interview him, asking what happened in there. Meanwhile, a medical team tries to examine him and even asks for his blood type in case a transfusion is needed. The protagonist can't understand why there's so much commotion. Nearby, the girl, standing beside her brother, says that surprisingly, Shin Sang-hyun came out of the dungeon in one piece and that she made a mistake by calling for help. Seeing this scene, Shin Sang-hyun is stunned. With a crowd surrounding him, there's only one person he can focus on, his old friend, who, in this life, probably has no idea who he is. Shin Sang-hyun remembers that in the past, after 10 years as an adventurer, he needed a team for a mission. But because he didn't have many advantages, he had a hard time putting together or joining a team, which left him feeling cut off from the world. Until one day, everything changed. A group approached him and invited him to join a raid for the first time. The group's leader was happy to find a swordsman who could join his team. Shin Sang-hyun, on the other hand, was happy for a different reason. Even so, he turned down the offer to join the team. By that point, he was so used to working alone that, out of pride, he chose to keep it that way rather than join a team of strangers. Because of that pride, he went into that mission alone and nearly died, if not for one thing. The knight from before showed up at the same raid and offered to help. He said he knew the dangers of that raid and understood that going in alone, anyone would struggle. So even after being turned down, he had followed the protagonist all the way there, knowing the guy might need help. In that moment, Shin Sang-hyun swallowed his pride and thanked him for it. That gesture made all the difference. That was when he finally agreed to join a guild, and everything worked out really well up to a certain point. One day, the protagonist's best friend said he couldn't take it anymore and was about to leave the guild. He was tired of putting himself in increasingly dangerous situations and wanted to change his life before he ended up gone, just like he had seen happen to so many other adventurers. When his younger sister left home, he had decided to build a guild to help other adventurers who needed support. But after so many losses, he just couldn't keep going. The protagonist wanted to support his friend, but felt that the guild had grown too much and couldn't afford to lose its leader at that point, so he convinced him to stay. Back in the present, the protagonist wants to make things right. He walks up to the young man and tells him never to form a guild, because that's what he wished he had said when he had the chance, but didn't. Naturally, the young man is confused, since he doesn't understand why those words were said to him, or why a famous adventurer would approach him in the middle of a crowd. He says his memory is a bit fuzzy, and asks the protagonist if they know each other from somewhere. Furious, the young man's sister confronts the protagonist just for speaking to her brother, which makes Shin Sang-hyun step away from them for good. Far away, in a residential dimension for monsters, a group of individuals are talking as they walk, until one of them says that these people are perfect for his plan. Back on Earth, the news announces that the adventurer Shin Sang-hyun has just cleared the famous silent dungeon on his own, despite all the dangers. The reporter informs that Shin Sang-hyun warned the association that the dungeon is more dangerous than previously believed, and that the boss there is more powerful than any ordinary monster. Watching this, the protagonist realizes the association is already on it, and believes no other adventurer will be stepping into that dungeon anytime soon. He thinks about how he barely made it out in one piece, and that what he gained from clearing the dungeon was more than just experience or items. A flashback shows that before leaving the dungeon, he got more information about the late bloomer model student constellation. On top of that, he also obtained powerful items and an inventory backpack. The final boss dropped better loot than the previous one, much to Shin Sang-hyun's delight. He was also thrilled to now have a larger inventory to carry more drops on future missions. Shin Sang-hyun thinks that in this life, he keeps coming across items and skills he never even heard of before. The goddess of luck said that was thanks to her, since she's been blessing him with her grace ever since they made their deal. The protagonist agrees that she helped, but he also gives himself some credit. He didn't waste any time and transfigured the items into food. But this time, the food the items turned into is so refined that Shin Sang-hyun can't even name the dishes. Either way, he knows the important thing is to eat. When he does, he tastes something incredible, like food made by the gods themselves. So, without wasting a second, he devours everything in front of him. After eating, he absorbs the items as usual, but this time he regrets not having eaten more because the flavor was absolutely delicious. Next, he takes a look at his new skills. However, the system asks him to choose between two, since he can only keep one. The first is telekinesis, which lets him control his sword from a distance, just like the demon knight did in the dungeon. The other is the silence skill, which despite its benefits, Shin Sang-hyun believes also comes with risks. And he's not wrong, since the system itself warns that using silence would drain a significant amount of his mana. The protagonist finds that pretty bad, and ends up turning down the silence skill. His other skills already consume a lot of mana, so the last thing he needs is a debuff like that. Still, he thinks that in this life, there's no risk he isn't willing to take. So he selects the silence skill, believing he'll be able to work around its downsides when the time comes. Then he notices something strange happening. New constellations show up to visit him, the great Mongol conqueror and the monarch of the sun. The goddess of luck says that Shin Sang-hyun is doing just fine with her and doesn't need any other constellations. However, she's caught off guard when a third constellation appears. Even the others are surprised to see a third one approaching because this is a new goddess, a recent arrival among the constellations. Irritated, the goddess of luck asks what a newcomer is doing approaching her protege. The new goddess, for her part, says she's been watching Shin Sang-hyun for some time and that she's been impressed by his courage. She also says she'd love to stand by the side of a man like him. Not only that, but she claims the protagonist should leave behind outdated constellations and embrace the glamour of a new goddess like herself. Furious, the goddess of luck tries to intimidate the newcomer, asking who exactly she's calling outdated. The protagonist realizes a whole mess has started because of him and figures it's better to dismiss everyone, just like he did last time. But the new goddess claims she has secret information she can give to Shin Sang-hyun, though to get it, he'll have to make a deal with her. To give him a taste of what it's about, she says the information concerns the late bloomer model student constellation. The protagonist immediately moves closer to the goddess and asks what she knows about the late bloomer constellation. The goddess answers that he's out traveling in the dimension of bodies because his obsession with knowledge led him there to study certain creatures. But she adds that if Shin Sang-hyun wants to know more, he'll need to leave the goddess of luck behind and accept a deal with her. Back in the present, the protagonist reflects on what he found out and concludes that in his past life, he never knew his constellation had traveled to other dimensions. Either way, he didn't learn much since he didn't make a deal with the new goddess. Instead, he stuck with the goddess of luck and asked her to look into the other constellation. The goddess of luck is happy that Shin Sang-hyun stayed with her, but she's sorry she can't help him since she didn't find anything. Frustrated, the protagonist thinks that the dimension of bodies is where desperate, washed-up constellations go when they have nothing left. So he figures his old companion must be in trouble, and he's sorry there's nothing he can do about it. Far from there, inside the Hyunjong Corporation building, an employee shares with the company's president a list of available participants on the open market. The first name that comes up for her is none other than Shin Sang-hyun. Her name is Han Hyunjong, and when she sees the protagonist's information, she finds him quite interesting. After a while, the protagonist moved on with his life, but he never stopped thinking about his old constellation. He keeps wondering what kind of extra information he could have gotten if he'd accepted the contract with the new goddess. Either way, he concludes that the best move is to keep his relationship with the goddess of luck, since she's the one who saved him from death during the silent dungeon. After driving for a bit, he finally reaches his destination, the Hyunjong Market. This place is well known among adventurers, since it's where they gather to buy and sell magic artifacts. The market guarantees user safety in exchange for a fee, and not knowing that tends to put unsuspecting adventurers in danger. Either way, markets like this one are the safest way to trade items. Several guilds around the world have their own open markets, but in Korea, the largest one belongs to the Hyunjong Corporation. On top of the market itself, they're also affiliated with a powerful guild, which on its own is enough to guarantee the safety of the place. But there's another reason the market is so well known. The person running it is the seasoned adventurer Han Hyunjong, the only adventurer in the world capable of performing rank S buffs. Adventurers from all over the world visit this market because of her, and with so many strong adventurers around, the safety of the place ends up being guaranteed without anyone having to say it out loud. That said, the number of people looking for her buffs is huge, which tends to cause constant chaos around there. When he arrives at the market, the protagonist is greeted by an employee. She says she'll clear his entry as soon as she confirms his credentials. After identifying him, the attendant notices that Shin Sang-hyun is on a priority list and lets him know she'll be escorting him to the special floor. With that, the protagonist realizes that, without even trying, he's caught the attention of the owner of the place. In the middle of all this, he notices a few guys gossiping about him. They say they heard that Kim Miso and Shin Sang-hyun are dating. They also wonder how she can feel comfortable dating another guy after losing her last boyfriend in an accident. The protagonist is slightly bothered by that. Not wanting to draw attention, he casually remarks that the market is more laid back than he expected, nodding toward the kind of people around him. The receptionist picks up on the hint, and the gossipers are immediately removed from the premises by security. Shin Sang-hyun is satisfied seeing that and thinks he can now focus on what actually matters. After that, he takes the elevator up to the special floor. On the way, he thinks that in his past life he never would have imagined setting foot in a place this exclusive, let alone being personally invited by the owner. When he arrives at the VIP floor, the kind of people there makes it clear the floor really is exclusive. He also notices that a different receptionist has come to attend to him, which shows he's genuinely being treated in a special way. Her name is Song Ah-hyun, and she says she's ready to help him with whatever he needs. Soon after, the protagonist comes across a magic book, but he's taken aback by the price. Song Ah-hyun explains that the item is called the Book of the Abyss and costs that much because of its highly sought-after contents. Shin Sang-hyun says that, as a swordsman, he doesn't use mage items and asks to see artifacts that match his category. In the middle of that, he notices one item in particular is drawing a lot of attention from the people around. Song Ah-hyun says she can explain the item, but the protagonist says he'd rather check it out for himself. As he gets closer, he's completely stunned by what he sees, because the item in question gives off a massive flame. It's a magic stone called Almighty. The protagonist notices that this is one of the 9 legendary artifacts that exist around the world, known for being enormous sources of power, but his shock gets even bigger when he sees the price, 3 trillion won. On top of that, the item is listed as belonging to Jeron Decay, which means that if such an important artifact is up for sale, he must have even better items. Shin Sang-hyun came to the market feeling motivated, but now he feels like a small fish in a sea of sharks. He keeps walking through the exclusive floor, but every item he sees leaves him stunned by the price. Even the cheapest artifacts cost more than he can afford. In the middle of that, he's recognized. The guy introduces himself as Jung Junhyuk and asks if the protagonist is looking for something specific. Right away, the protagonist recognizes that name and thinks that in the future, this guy becomes quite well known after gaining an ability called Perfect Storm. Jung Junhyuk says he's not there just to buy, but also to sell, and that he has an artifact that doesn't match his abilities and would love to pass along. He reveals the Ring of Life, an artifact with a passive effect that increases mana, and asks if Shin Sang-hyun is interested. Seeing that, the protagonist wonders if this guy is trying to use the market's direct exemption system on him. Unlike other markets, this one has an unusual system that uses a direct transaction exemption. Normally, items sold there generate 5% in revenue for the market, but when one adventurer deals directly with another, that fee isn't charged. The protagonist thinks the ring would be pretty useful for his abilities, but he knows something that good won't come cheap, so he turns down the offer. In the middle of all this, a commotion breaks out. Security guards scold a woman for eating on the premises and accuse her of not behaving according to the establishment's rules. She defends herself by saying she bought her pizzas with her own money, so she has every right to eat them. The guards, however, say they don't care about her food, because that's not what this is about. It's about the way she's behaving. The woman keeps defending herself, arguing that there's nothing wrong with being hungry. The protagonist walks over and apologizes for interrupting her meal, but lets her know he's interested in the artifacts she's selling. She says she's not stopping to eat now, so if he wants, he can go ahead and take the items and look at them as long as he likes. So the protagonist picks up the artifacts. He notices that both are magic rings. One boosts the user's speed, and the other increases their potential. Shin Sang-hyun thinks this would solve his stamina and mana loss problems, and on top of that, he notices nobody else there seems interested in these items. So he asks the girl how much she's charging for the pair. She says each one is worth around 1,500,000,000, but if he's buying both, she can give him a discount and charge 2 billion. The protagonist makes a face, so the girl says she can bring the price down a little for him. After some negotiation, they settle on 1,300,000,000. The protagonist thinks that in the past, he was pretty poor and never would have been able to buy something like this. But now that things are different, he sees it as an investment that could potentially return double what he spent. The girl, for her part, says that with that money, she's going to buy some good food and then hand the rest over to her orphanage. The protagonist asks if she runs an orphanage, and the girl confirms it, showing him a photo. When he sees the photo, the protagonist feels a sense of familiarity. That orphanage is the same one he lived in during his past life, after losing his family, but he never imagined he'd run into someone from there again after everything that happened. The girl looks a little confused and mentions that Shin Sang-hyun looks pale, asking what happened. The protagonist says he just remembered something from his past, but changes the subject and asks what happened to the orphanage. The girl tells him it was destroyed in a collapse, something the protagonist already knew, but wanted to confirm. Shin Sang-hyun thinks that his goals as a player are completely different from hers, since the girl wants to raise money for the orphanage and not for personal reasons. She explains that her parents founded it, and that's why she wants to rebuild it, to keep the family's legacy alive. She even tells Shin Sang-hyun he's welcome to learn more about the project and join the team, and hands him a business card. The protagonist notices the card was hand-drawn and figures they really must be short on money. In a way, he feels moved thinking about his past but tries to hide it. The girl, however, notices Shin Sang-hyun's reaction and finds it endearing. Meanwhile, at the Eden Guild headquarters, the protagonist heads to the building for a visit. An adventurer named Jo Jinho greets him, saying he's been expecting him. Shin Sang-hyun thinks it's surprising to be received by Jo Jinho, and that he'll have to take this visit seriously. 1 hour earlier, he was still at the market. The protagonist had promised to get in touch with the orphanage girl later, and just as he was saying goodbye, he got a call. A little annoyed, he excused himself to answer. On the other end, Kim Miso called to let him know a new portal was about to open. She also said the minimum was 2 people, and the minimum level was 130, since this is the portal they call the Black Gate. That makes the protagonist remember something. This place was successfully cleared by Kang Boa, the sword arbiter, and after that, it became known as the Black Gate. The protagonist thinks that he and Kim Miso have been working well together so far, and that there's no reason to turn down the offer. On top of that, he remembers the reward from that dungeon was an incredibly powerful epic artifact, though he can't recall the details. Either way, he immediately agrees to go, knowing it'll be worth it. Back in the present, he made his way to the guild building to meet up with Kim Miso, and he's not thinking about what he left behind at the market anymore. Jo Jinho asks if something is bothering him. Shin Sang-yun says no, and the two keep moving. Along the way, Jo Jinho mentions that Kim Miso is in a meeting with the guild leader and will come see him afterward. But he says that if he wants, they can spend the time in the training room, and points out that it's a rare opportunity since not everyone gets to use it. The protagonist, for his part, feels the atmosphere of the place shift. Jo Jinho says he goes through that every time too, but tells the protagonist to make himself at home. As soon as he walks in, the protagonist sees someone already using the room and says they shouldn't interrupt. In the arena, Shin Taeri is training. Once again, she has a golem as a practice dummy, and she's not holding back since she always takes her fights seriously. But this time, she has an audience. Jo Jinho says he had the training room reserved and asks why Shin Taeri is there. She looks a little confused, and even more so when she sees Shin Sang-gyun in the building. Shin Taeri says she hasn't seen him in a while and asks what he's doing there. The protagonist says Kim Miso invited him again for another raid. Shin Taeri sarcastically remarks that the protagonist has been getting pretty close to her friend lately. She notices that Jo Jinho is getting visibly nervous, so she says she'll leave them to it, but that she wants to train with Shin Sang-yun in the future and will reach out later. After that, Jo Jinho says they're finally alone and can get some practice in. He then asks if Shin Sang-yun is up for a duel. The protagonist wonders if he's going to be challenged by everyone in the Eden Guild, since Shin Taeri herself challenged him when they first met. Jo Jinho tells him there's nothing to worry about, saying he just wants to see his skills in action. He explains that ever since becoming a swordsman adventurer, his hobby has been testing other adventurers' abilities. Hearing that, the protagonist realizes Jo Jinho wants to get to know him better through a fight. Jo Jinho tells the protagonist he can use any weapon he wants from the guild's arsenal. Shin Sang-yun, however, says he already has the perfect weapon and pulls his longsword from his subspace, ready to start the duel. Surprised, Jo Jinho says he's never seen anyone with that ability, which only makes him more excited to face Shin Sang-yun. He gets ready to begin, and as he does, his body grows larger, to the point where Jo Jinho ends up 3 times his normal size. Meanwhile, in the guild office, Kim Miso's father is worried about his daughter's safety. Even though she insists she knows what she's doing, her father isn't at ease. Frustrated, Miso says she's going to keep walking her own path and asks him not to contact her. At that, Mr. Kim makes a call. He speaks with guild leader Jang and asks him for a favor. Back at the training arena, Jo Jinho says he's about to find out everything he needs to know about Shin Sang-yun, and he can't wait. After activating his combat mode, Jo Jinho asks if the protagonist is ready. Seeing what his opponent has done, Shin Sang-yu thinks this is the first time he's seen an Eden Guild swordsman in giant mode. He knows Du Gyungsu is the benchmark among swordsmen, but not everyone can replicate his style, so many don't even try. Fully focused on raw strength, believing that was the only answer, those people kept training their bodies and pushing their power. Shin Sang-yu himself was one of them, and yet he wonders who truly stands at the peak of strength-based sword fighting. There's no single consensus worldwide, but at least within Korea, Jo Jinho is one of the strongest, largely because of that unique ability of his. Even as the swordsman meta shifted, he held his ground perfectly. With that in mind, the protagonist feels a rush of excitement at the thought of facing such a powerful opponent. Jo Jinho, on the other hand, says he likes Shin Sang-yu's confidence and hopes he proves his worth during the fight. The protagonist notices that just by raising his sword, his opponent sends out waves of wind pressure. He figures the right move is to meet force with force. Jo Jinho isn't holding back, because he knows the protagonist won't hold back either. Shin Sang-yu, for his part, knows he has to be careful. He's not up against an ordinary opponent, so he can't afford to make mistakes. Then Jo Jinho attacks with a burst of power, but the result surprises him. He didn't hit Shin Sang-yu. Instead, his attack was blocked. Jo Jinho is genuinely caught off guard by the protagonist's sharpness, not just because he blocked the attack, but because he chose to do that instead of going for some complicated strategy. The protagonist then says it's his turn to attack. Jo Jinho realizes that by letting himself get surprised, he left himself open, and that could be dangerous. The protagonist winds up and attacks with tremendous force, the impact reaching even the surrounding area. Even after taking the hit, Jo Jinho is glad to see the kid isn't holding back. At first, he He thought Shin Sang-yu was just another show-off, but now he realizes how wrong that conclusion was. Either way, he knows he can't back down now. He compliments the protagonist's attack and says that normally, a regular adventurer would be blown apart trying to block one of his strikes, but he can see the kid is tough. Still, he says a real man doesn't need to be modest, and he wants to see what Shin Sang-yu is still keeping in reserve. Jo Jinho apologizes in advance. Even so, he says he can't hold himself back when it comes to fighting, because he sees it as disrespectful not to go all out against any opponent. The protagonist thinks about how this is the same attack Jo Jinho used to save countless lives during the second collapse, which would have happened 20 years from now. And that same relentless barrage of meteors summoned by spellcasting monsters is about to come crashing down on him. Jo Jinho says this technique is still incomplete, which is why he doesn't use it often. But standing in front of Shin Sang-yu, he feels like he has to give everything he's got. The protagonist thinks that what Jo Jinho calls incomplete is already more than he can handle. Even using all of his power, he knows he can't defend against this attack. So Shin Sang-yu knows he needs a plan. His strategy is to strike at the flank where his opponent's force is least concentrated. It's a ridiculous strategy, but he thinks it's all he has. The protagonist knows this attack is the equivalent of more than 700 adventurers striking at once. But even if it sounds crazy, he's going to see it through to the end. After all, that's what he's been doing ever since he came back, and he wants to turn the impossible into reality one more time. Not too far away, Kim Miso is walking while turning a few things over in her mind. She's a little down about what happened between her and her father, but she tells herself she needs to shake it off because she's about to meet up with Shin Sang-yu. Then she and everyone else in the building feels a tremor. Everyone assumes it's an earthquake, but Miso knows the shaking came from the training room. Alarmed, she heads over there, convinced this can only have something to do with Shin Sang-yu. When she arrives, she can barely see anything through all the smoke. She wonders what on earth happened in there. Jo Jinho says Shin Sang-yu keeps surprising him because he didn't expect him to face such a powerful attack head-on. The protagonist thanks him for the compliment, but admits he didn't come out of it unscathed. Jo Jinho tells him not to worry, since the guild has doctors who can take care of him. Even though he's pretending to be fine, Jo Jinho was affected too. But what's really bothering him is the fact that a newcomer is operating at the same level as him, a seasoned adventurer. The moment their swords clashed, Shin Sang-yu's technique showed no hesitation or inexperience whatsoever, which doesn't exactly fit the image of a rookie. Either way, Jo Jinho thinks the protagonist is strong, but still has a long road ahead of him. He thanks Shin Sang-yu for accepting the duel and says it gave him a lot to think about. He also says that after this, no one in the Eden Guild will doubt Shin Sang-yu's abilities. The protagonist then asks if that was some kind of entrance test for the Eden Guild. Jo Jinho confirms it was, but says the protagonist has the potential for more, and invites him to join his secret club, exclusive to men. Right then, Kim Miso cuts in. She says she only asked Jo Jinho to welcome Shin Sang-yu, not try to kill him.